Chapter 58. Outside the bay, more than a dozen fishing boats rode the rising tide and rushed towards the mouth of the bay at high speed. They were so fast that the few scouts that the gray-scaled Nagas had set up could not react in time. All the elite warriors had been transferred into the bay, and the small number of Nagas and Murlocs left outside the bay did not even have time to react before they were defeated by Duque's magic. The fishermen fearlessly crashed into the mouth of the bay, following the tide and pulling out the plug at the bottom of the cabin with a long rope, allowing a large amount of seawater to pour into the boat. At the same time, they looked for an opportunity to jump into the sea and quickly swam back to Makarov's side. The entire process was done in one go, and it was almost completed before the Nagas realized what was going on. When more than a dozen boats completely blocked the mouth of the bay, Duque stood at the top of the largest boat and made that extremely pretentious declaration. "I heard that we can farm monsters here." At first, the gray-scaled Nagas and their subordinate Murlocs did not know what it meant. As far as they were concerned, it was ridiculous to think that they could block their way out by using a few broken ships to block the entrance of the bay. But soon, they could not laugh. Level 2 spell, Darsong's Cold Prison. Low-level spells also depended on who was using them. If it was the previous Duque, it would not be an exaggeration to say that he was squeezed dry n times. But now, Duque was an earth mage with a perfect, arcane circuit. Duque shouted fiercely, a horrifying chill instantly burst out from his body. It was very difficult to simply freeze moving seawater, and Duque used a trick of using a sunken ship as a framework. The seawater that turned into ice was stuck by the sunken ship, and in turn, became the support of other ice blocks. Layers of ice were stacked on top of each other, and the entire huge ice dam was almost completed in the blink of an eye. The Nagas and Murlocs blinked and saw that Duque was already standing on top of an ice throne that was more than 3 meters above the water, looking down at the gray-scaled Nagas and Murlocs who were tossing and turning in the bay with a calm gaze. In the next moment, the iconic 108 hands of magic appeared in the void. At this moment, Duque's aura was astonishing. He was so dazzling that he was like an ice god descending from the heavens. Near the mouth of the bay, a male Naga tried to attack Duque just now, but his entire lower body was frozen. He let out bursts of low wails, and the 3 arms that could still move were desperately slapping the ice. Noisy. Duque raised his eyebrows coldly. One of the hands of magic in the void suddenly extended its index finger, and a maximized arcane missile accurately pierced through the male Naga's mouth and the back of its head, splashing out an arrow of blood. Naga let out the last whimper of its life. Its tall and majestic body swayed, then fell back onto the ice. There was silence on the battlefield. Everyone who witnessed this scene seemed to have forgotten about time and everything in the outside world. Makarov and the other mercenaries and fishermen subconsciously stopped what they were doing. Apart from the salty smell of the sea and the chill of the icy wind, the air in their nostrils seemed to be filled with excitement, heat, and a hint of a legend. Are all old mages this powerful? Or is it that only Sir Duke Marcus is this powerful? Even though everyone on the boat had their eyes on that ridiculously young figure, Makarov did not forget his current situation. He took a step forward and blocked Duque's line of sight from the dazed helmsman. He pulled out his dagger and swung it in the opposite direction. "What are you standing there for? Turn around immediately. We'll await your triumphant return. Are you trying to shame your name by losing a fisherman?" The subordinates immediately came to their senses and quickly turned the helm, leaving young Fan behind. Within the bay, the battle that had paused for a short while began once again. Just like Blind Old Man and Fish Spear, the Murlocs under the gray-scaled Naga's command crumbled the moment they saw Duque's many hands of magic. They cried, screamed, and made all sorts of unintelligible noises. Thousands of Murlocs were thrown into chaos in the middle of the bay. "Kaku, in the name of the mighty god of the sea's 100-handed reaper, attack!" Blind Old Man and Fish Spear immediately launched a counterattack, cutting down the Naga's Murlocs as if they were vegetables. It's a mess, it's all a mess. Even if the gray-scaled Naga Siren still had the upper hand in terms of high-end combat power, the female gray-scaled Naga siren priest knew that if Duke subdued all of her murlocs, the hundreds of Naga siren would be wiped out. She ordered the strongest male Naga siren warriors to continue attacking Vara while she personally led her subordinates and charged towards the mouth of the bay. They had to kill Duke and open up a gap. As long as they could get rid of Duke, the Naga siren's last hope, then everything would be back on track. Duke sneered as he watched the Naga charging towards him. "Hey, System Elf, what's the evaluation result of the plan I proposed to you last time to use Hand of Magic to shoot arcane missiles at the same time?" With the System Elf, it was equivalent to automatically having the metamagic specialty of multicasting. The only difference was in power. After examining the host's arcane circuit, it is recommended that the host fire no more than 80 arcane missiles at a time. The arcane missiles in the world of Azeroth were slightly different. Because a single arcane missile was less powerful, it was generally fired 3 at the same time in a triangle to ensure lethality. Therefore, one shot was 80 hits? Then I might as well reduce it to 36 hits. A large number of hands of magic unfolded into a pair of wings behind Duque. Duque raised his right hand and waved it down forcefully. As if hearing the command of their commander, the hands of magic in the void turned their wrists at the same time and fired 100 shots at the same time. The arcane energy that was the size of a fist was emitted, and the powerful and destructive energy expanded. The resulting bluish-purple light strongly stimulated the eyes of the Naga. Every 36 hands of magic formed a wave, and the 3 rounds of hands of magic seemed to be firing ceaselessly. Without deliberately aiming, Duque poured the barrage of arcane missiles on the place where the Nagas were most concentrated. The Naga scales, which were like iron plates, were obviously effective in resisting physical attacks, but they obviously couldn't resist Duque's arcane missiles. The arcane missiles, after being polarized, visually looked like long magic spears, tearing the bodies of the Nagas into pieces. Dozens of heavy and sharp tridents were blasted into smithereens, and over 100 majestic bodies were pierced through. If the blood that was floating in the bay earlier was mostly the blood of the Murlocs, then this huge pool of blood now had a new addition, the blood of the gray-scaled Nagas. Chapter 59. At this moment, the light of the sun seemed to have dimmed, and the Nagas who were killed by Duque collapsed in the shallow water less than 1.5 meters deep. They used their corpses to form a violent psychic wave, dispelling the morale of the Murlocs dominated by the gray-scaled Nagas like a hurricane. Ha 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 ha. That human is the real god of the sea, the gray-scaled Nagas are the fake messenger of the sea, we sharp-toothed Murlocs have rebelled. The betrayal of the Murlocs intensified the already chaotic situation in front of them. When the gray-scaled Naga priest found that she could no longer command any Murlocs, and thousands of Murlocs attacked the gray-scaled Nagas at the same time with their clumsy weapons, even if she was stupid, she knew that the situation was hopeless. Retreat, she wanted to lead her people to escape and go straight back to Stranglethorn Vale. But would Duque let them go? Duque himself did not realize that his black pupils were rippling with cold mockery, and he muttered to himself, useless guy. Slow reaction. You don't even have the qualifications to be my subordinate. Just like playing a turret defense game, Duque only needed to focus on dealing with the most threatening opponent. As for the miscellaneous soldiers, naturally the system elf would help him aim and shoot. There were many Nagas who rushed to the small iceberg at the mouth of the bay, but none could reach Duque. Suddenly, Duque was shot by frost arrows, which came from the attack of 3 gray-scaled Naga females. A faint smile appeared on Duque's face. If he was still injured by these level 1 frost arrows, without the support of metamagic abilities, it would be really embarrassing. He gathered some of his magic, raised his left hand, and an ice wall appeared in the path of the 3 frost arrows that the system calculated would have to pass. The ice arrows hit the ice wall out of thin air, and completely lost the power they should have, and even the cold air became part of the ice wall. It's my turn. Duque suddenly gathered most of his magic. The magic consumption of each arcane missile was not high, but it was different for fire spells. Fire spells had always been a big consumption of magic. Duque could take 80 arcane missiles at the same time, but he could only take 5 flame bursts. Duque's hair seemed to have been ignited from his head to his shoulders. Crimson flames rose more than a meter above his head. The fire magic power from the fire elemental realm gathered in front of the hand of magic in the void. Seeing the 5 huge fireballs suspended in the air, the faces of the gray-scaled Naga siren priests turned pale. They screamed and raised their magic shields. Even the most loyal male Naga siren used his huge body to block between Duque and the Naga siren priests, trying to defend their leader with their lives. So what? Under the command of the system elf, purplish-blue arcane missiles descended from the sky, all of them concentrated in one area. In the blink of an eye, the shooting line between Duque and the gray-scaled Naga siren priest was cleared. No! The Naga leader screamed and twisted her snake waist in the shallow water, trying to avoid the attack of Flame Blast. Duque laughed loudly, and a huge fireball smashed down. Hee hee. Watch my 5 fireballs divine sect. The Naga siren priest's speed was not slow. From the time she started to move to the time the fireball hit, she had already moved 4 meters away from her original position. However, Arcane Fire Circuit not only gave Duque abundant arcane and fire magic power, but also gave him more precise magic control ability. The high-speed fireball actually made an unscientific turn in the air, drawing a clear arc in the void. Vara, who was still in the middle of a bloody battle, was dumbfounded. He almost forgot about the battle around him. The gray-scaled Naga siren priest struggled to swim a few steps, and was hit in the face by a flame blast. The magic shield saved her life, allowing her to escape the fate of being the first to be killed. However, this only extended her life for a little longer. After the first hit, she was marked with a must-hit label. No matter how she struggled, moved, and resisted, she was still hit by the second, third, fourth, and fifth flame blast. The second one charred her whole body. The third one blew up several of her arms. The fourth one blew her waist into 2 pieces. The fifth one was actually already a corpse. Under the gaze of thousands of murlocs and hundreds of Nagas, the dignified gray-scaled Naga siren leader and clan high priest was killed by Duque's fire magic in the shallow water area. The intense heat even evaporated all the water around the gray-scaled Naga siren priest in an instant, forming a temporary hole. After a full second, the seawater filled the hole again. At this time, Duque's fierce and domineering voice echoed throughout the bay. Who else? Come out. Even if Duque used the human language, it did not hinder the murlocs from understanding Duque's meaning. Duque was forcing the next challenger out. Were there any more challengers? The number 1 male Naga siren warrior of the gray-scaled clan was cut into sashimi by Duque. Their chief priest had also become a roasted fish. For a moment, the whole battlefield was dead silent again. Duque's domineering and fierce eyes swept from left to right, and found that no one dared to look at him. Duque suddenly had the feeling of a max-level mage returning to the novice village to farm monsters. That's good, in the name of the 100-handed death god, I command you, surrender to me, or die. Thousands of murlocs knelt down, calling out, Kakagao, non-stop. The symbol of submission was even translated by the system elf, and Duque didn't bother to read it. The only 2 remaining female Naga siren priests of the gray-scaled clan put their 6 arms together and bowed. At the same time, all the surviving male Naga siren also showed their submission. Even if Duque had the idea of taking them in, before he killed the gray-scaled leader, there were still more than 100 gray-scaled male Naga siren who were shot into meat paste by arcane missiles. Looking at the more than 280 gray-scaled Nagas, Duque suddenly had the idea of killing the gray-scaled Naga siren leader in seconds. At this time, Vara Ringscale Avis, who was bathed in blood and had no less than 10 wounds, swam over. She also bowed deeply. Congratulations, Master. Duque glanced at her wounds. How are your injuries? Minor injuries, Vara replied faintly. Well, from now on, these gray-scaled Nagas and murlocs will be under your command. Within a month, I want you to move everything of the gray-scaled Naga here. The clever Vara frowned. Master, why are you in such a hurry? Is something big going to happen? Was the dark portal a big deal? Of course it was. Of course, Duque couldn't tell Vara. It is indeed a big deal, maybe in 2 or 3 years, maybe in a few months, I can't say for sure. However, this is indeed a super big deal that involves the whole world. You just have to prepare for a large-scale naval battle. Vara knew that as an outsider, she couldn't get Duque's complete trust. And Duque's performance of descending from the heavens had deeply shocked her. Now, she had no other thoughts. Although she didn't know who her enemy was, Vara bowed deeply again. As you will. Chapter 60. It was another glorious victory. More witnesses, more spoils of war. For 3 days in a row, the corpse of the gray-scaled Naga leader and hundreds of Murlocs hung in the port of Stormwind. Most of the Naga and Murlocs within 300 nautical miles of Stormwind have been wiped out by His Excellency Duke Marcus. Fishermen, you can fish to your heart's content. If you join our Hurricane Chamber of Commerce, you will receive better protection and better profits. If you don't have a boat, we can lend it to you first. You only need to sign a 5-year labor contract with our Chamber of Commerce, spend no less than 25 weeks at sea every year, and promise to hand over 30% of the catch to the Chamber of Commerce. A brand new fishing boat is yours, and once the contract expires, the fishing boat will belong to you. As one of Duque's mouthpieces, Makarov had officially become Duque's follower. Now, he often encouraged more fishermen at the docks for Duque, and more young men to join Duque's newly established Hurricane Chamber of Commerce. In fact, Duque used the common method of taxi companies before his transmigration to seduce fishermen or fishermen's descendants who could not find work, and it was really successful. And more varieties of fish and seafood also supported the expansion of Duque's business. Especially in the last month, Duque had formed a whaling fleet. On the big ship, Duque patted a few huge barrels next to him. This is the float. As long as the javelin tied to the rope hits the whale, we don't need to fight this behemoth at all. We just need to stop it from diving, and when it runs out of strength, victory will be ours. Duque's explanation made Windsor, who was standing beside Duque, speechless. Yes, Windsor had returned with the craftsman that Duque needed. Before he even arrived at Stormwind, he had already heard of Duque's reputation in Kul Tiras. A pearl line. In this era where diving was risking your life against Murlocs, Naga, and sharks, most people could only try their luck picking up pearls from the shells that washed up on the beach. But Duque continuously produced all kinds of seafloor specialties that made nobles crazy. The appearance of the Pearl Sea route also stimulated the merchants of Kul Dilas. A bet of 500 gold coins? There were more than 2 zeros. Therefore, Windsor simply said that he was sent by the owner of the Pearl Line to recruit craftsmen. In addition, Duque managed to convince the Stormwind army to lend him a griffin and have Makarov bring 20,000 gold notes to Windsor. In the end, Windsor had not only brought along a huge team of 200 craftsmen, but also cleared out all the inventory in Kul Tiras shipyards. Unexpectedly, as soon as he returned and saw Windsor's ship, Duque had a new idea, a whaling fleet. The others threw the javelin with their arms, but Duque was even better. He simply stuck the javelin into the whale's tail with hand of magic. The sailors watched in astonishment as the barrels swayed on the surface of the sea, but did not sink. More than an hour later, the exhausted whale floated to the surface of the water. Seeing this scene, the hundreds of sailors on the 3 whaling ships burst into enthusiastic cheers. Windsor and Makarov were dumbfounded. Reggie, do you know what this big guy is for? Reginald Windsor, who was nicknamed Reggie, was still not used to Duque's almost blind trust in him and the way he treated him like an old friend. He wanted to do business, but remembered that he had lost the bet, and he was already Duque's follower. Sighing in his heart, Windsor asked tentatively, "Can it be eaten?" Duque smiled and shook his head. "Most whale meat is not delicious. What I want is inside the whale." Duque would not say it out loud. His goal was the ambergris of the sperm whale. That thing made into a perfume would drive the noble ladies of the entire Azeroth human kingdom crazy. He knew what to do in general, and this would be the key stepping stone for Duque to open the door to wealth and convenience. Duque continued, "Of course, I won't waste such a big piece of meat. Drag it back, and I'll tell you how to make it taste good. By the way, whale fat is also good stuff." Duke already had a complete set of soy sauce brewing methods. This was purely something that Duke accidentally remembered when he was bored and asked Biyao what soy sauce was. He would divide the process into multiple parts, each operated by a different master. In fact, the first batch of finished products was already out, and the results were quite good. A few days later, in the Stormwind Palace, King Lang Rin and the Queen, the young prince and princess, and Anjuan Lothar saw the royal chef serving him a dish he had never seen before. "This is..." The king looked up and looked strangely at his royal chef. "This is a new dish that has recently appeared in Stormwind, raw salmon." "Fish? That stinky thing? And how do you eat it raw?" In Azeroth, people still did not know how to avoid the smell of fish. In the minds of most nobles, things like fish were eaten by the lower classes. But the royal chef used the method taught by Duque to show Lang and Anjuan how to pour lemon juice on the iced salmon, and how to eat it raw with wasabi and soy sauce. With the mentality of trying it out, Lang and Anjuan tried it. It really tastes special. I think I'm starting to like this stuff." Lang gently wiped his mouth. The little prince and the little princess repeatedly said that they wanted an extra portion. At this time, Anjuan spoke. "Lang, do you remember Duke Marcus who was in the limelight?" "Of course, the youngest earth mage in our kingdom." When answering, Lang also glanced at the fan-shaped red coral placed in the center of the dining room. The fiery red coral had a radius of nearly a meter, which was given to the king by Duque. Why? This thing was also made by him. Oh. Isn't he a mage? How did he become a chef? King Lang was curious. In fact, this mage Marcus has done a lot of things. Anjuan told Lang one by one what Duque had done recently. From taking back the Naga and Murlocs, forming the Pearl Sea route, to expanding the fishing range of fishermen, to whaling, to making spices such as soy sauce and wasabi. The more Lang listened, the more he liked it. "I like this little guy. My tax officer has mentioned him to me more than once. He pays taxes on time and in full in one go. It seems that we are going to have a good year. Unfortunately, Mediv is missing, otherwise I would have recommended this dish to him. The problem is that recently, he officially submitted a report to me, hoping to form a whaling team of 200 men using javelins and cannons, and to expand a large stone pier." Chapter 61. What does he want to do? Lang frowned. Lang did not know much about maritime affairs. But Lang knew that even the famous Menethil port only used wooden piers. Only the kingdom of Kurtiras, which had the largest navy, had a large number of ships entering and exiting the port every day, abandoned the wooden piers for the sturdier stone piers. "Your Majesty, I had the same concerns as you at first." But he proved his loyalty in another way. He proposed to fully fund Stormwind to build a navy of 16 medium-sized ships in the form of a gift to you, Your Majesty. He is only responsible for funding. The ships can be ordered from Kurtiras, the cannons from Iron Stove Castle, and all the personnel will be provided by us. Even the training fees for the personnel will be covered by him. At this point, even though Anduin tried to explain the proposal in a neutral tone, he could not hide the excitement in his voice. The west side of Stormwind City was the sea. Stormwind had a long coastline, but it could not be used effectively for a long time. Building a navy that could defend the coastline of Stormwind was also one of Anduin's wishes. Lang was not a fool. Everything in front of him came too easily. It was too surreal. If Duque tried to build an armed fleet that could beat the navy of Stormwind, Lang would not agree no matter what. He would definitely kill Duque's plan in the cradle. But Duque cleverly shut the mouths of Lang and the nobles. It's a little illegal for me to use a ballista, but if I let you use cannons, you won't be afraid, right? Gunpowder weapons in the world of Azeroth had not yet become popular. Although cannons had a lot of damage, most of them were muzzle-loading cannons. But no matter how outdated cannons seemed, they were not inferior to ballistas in naval battles. Cannons were superior in terms of range and power. Perhaps only the reloading speed of ballistas was slightly faster. After thinking for a while, King Lang cautiously said, "What does this Duque lad want?" "A perfume called Chanel that is about to hit the market will be exclusive rights for 100 years. Anduin Lothar recalled the words of Duque's messenger, Windsor. He also said that your majesty will soon know the magic of this perfume. Lang did not answer directly. What else? Anduin Lothar tapped his fingers on the table. He wants to make more money, enough money to build a great mage tower comparable to Karazhan. When King Lang heard this, he smiled. Most of the doubts in his heart were solved. He had heard of Duque's arrogance. He was greater than greatness, surpassing Medivh, who was the guardian of the world. Of course, Lang knew how astronomical the construction costs of a top-notch wizard tower were. It was a terrifying sum that even the entire treasury of Stormwind might not be enough. Now, Duque had talent, not only in magic, but also in business. If that was the goal, then it wouldn't be strange at all. Lang smiled. It shouldn't be a big problem. I'll think about it tonight and give you an answer tomorrow. Okay. Anduin retreated. Looking at the cluster of beautiful red coral trees, Lang turned and entered the royal study to check the documents. Before he knew it, it was late at night. Lang also felt sleepy. When he returned to the dormitory, he suddenly smelled a very elegant but relaxing scent. It was sweet, tempting, but not stimulating at all. Following the scent, Lang was surprised to find that the source of the scent was actually his lover. The queen was wearing a nightgown and lying on her side on the big bed. "Oh, my queen, you're really special tonight." Lang involuntarily rushed up and hugged the queen's slender waist. He sniffed hard, and Lang suddenly felt a warmth start to burn in his lower abdomen. "This is the new perfume I just got. Do you like it?" The queen smiled sweetly. "Oh, hell, no, it's great." Lang immediately understood what Anduin meant when he said, "You'll soon know the magic of this perfume," during the meal. That little fellow Duque actually knew how to bribe the queen? Lang was a little jealous. "This thing will turn all men into beasts. Then come and eat me." The queen smiled coquettishly. At this moment, Lang made a decision. That night, the great King Lang had a pleasant night. The next morning, when Anduin saw the king wearing an unseasonable high-collared shirt, Anduin immediately understood that His Majesty was trying to hide the mark of passion on his neck. "Damn it. This is the first time I hate how smart you are." The king was a little dumbfounded. "Well, Your Majesty, what's your decision?" "I agree, but there's an additional condition. In exchange for my protection of his business, I need him to take out an additional sum of money to help repair the walls of Stormwind City." "Your Majesty, your shrewdness has illuminated the entire kingdom." Anduin did not forget to show off his cleverness. "Pfft, I wonder who it is that asks me for money every few days to repair the walls." Lang pretended to be angry. "Ha ha ha ha." The king and his minister laughed heartily in the palace. When the king's counterproposal reached Duque, not only Makarov, but even Windsor showed an indignant expression. "Your Majesty, you've really opened your lion's mouth this time. Your Majesty, you're just a little rich, and yet you want Your Majesty to bear the burden of so many things." Windsor spat harshly. "Reggie, make a trip for me." "Tell him I agree," Duque said calmly. "Yes, I'll help you reject." "Wait, you said you agree?" Even Windsor, the loyal minister of Stormwind City, opened his mouth in shock. "I have as many ways to earn money as I want, but there are some things that can't be made up for once I miss it." Duque did not explain further. From the window of the small house that Anduin gave him, he looked at the buildings of Stormwind City that rose and fell along with the mountains. This was not the first time Duque had been acting mysteriously. Makarov and Windsor, who rarely interacted with mages, thought that all mages were like this. Duque did not want to explain, because no one would believe him even if he did. Stormwind City was destroyed during the first orc invasion, and Duque had always felt that it was a pity. Because of this, there were many tragedies. It was not just this massacre, but also the tragedy of the nobles not paying for the reconstruction when Stormwind City was rebuilt. He did not know if what he was doing could change the fate of Stormwind City. But in order to make up for the regret in his heart, he tried his best to do what he could. He did not want to achieve it, but only to do it. That was why Duque was willing to be blackmailed by Lang. He was not sure if Medivh would be like history. Feeling that time was tight, Duque felt that he had to at least have a certain amount of power and authority before the Dark Portal incident. Without noble status, the only way to truly integrate into the noble circle in the corrupted world of Stormwind City was to marry a noble woman of noble status. But Duque did not have the time to play political games. Similarly, political promises were not reliable. Since that was the case, if he wanted to have the authority of a chess player in the shortest time possible, he had to find another way. Now, it was clear that Duque had succeeded. Once the news spread, Duque quickly gained a new nickname, Sea King Duque. Chapter 62. The sense of crisis in Duque's heart never disappeared. It was hard to describe what kind of situation Medivh was in. When Medivh's mind was in control, he was a kind and wise person. He did his best to protect the few highest human leaders, and he believed that the interests of the kingdom would always be above everything else. For so many years, he guarded the world of Azeroth, and defeated the fierce attacks of invaders time and again. The people saw him as the indestructible guardian of Azeroth. He treated all races equally, without the slightest bit of prejudice. When he heard the legends and customs of a certain race, no matter which race the speaker was from, he would sincerely respect them and show the same strong interest in these legends and cultures from different regions. However, once Sardras gained the upper hand, Medivh's personality would change drastically. He would become gloomy and unsociable, almost unable to recognize his closest friends, and completely indifferent to strangers. He was secretive, and would often suddenly go on long journeys alone. When there was no one around, the Medivh controlled by Sardras wouldn't hesitate to use spells to chase away the visitors who disturbed him, or just kill them. But for his plan, the Transcendent Guardian of Azeroth was a very important cover. So in public, he was careful enough not to easily expose Sardras's true personality. Under Sardras's influence, Medivh began to secretly study all kinds of evil magic and witchcraft, and built an identical underground tower under Karazhan as a place for him to carry out dark rituals. All of these were things that Duke had no way of knowing. He could only do it in his own domain. He himself was attacking the Sky Wizard. As for his 3 loyal subordinates, they were methodically preparing for war according to his instructions. Makarov almost became Duque's representative to the outside world. He was given a lot of authority to transfer gold coins, and the donations to the Stormwind Navy were almost all decided by Makarov alone. Windsor helped Duque train the sailors, and throwing javelins and operating ballistae became compulsory lessons for the sailors. On the water beside the main channel of Stormport, there were apprentice sailors sitting on small sampans all day long, practicing throwing javelins at target ships filled with straw. According to Duke's standards, one had to be able to hit 80% on a human-shaped target at a distance of 30 meters in order to be hired as an official sailor of the whaling team. As for the ballistae, they had to hit the sampans of target ships from 100 meters away to be considered qualified. This was undoubtedly a demanding requirement for the fishermen's children who had never come into contact with this field. But the high salary attracted them to join Duke's whaling fleet, no matter how hard they tried. Sea King Duque had a good reputation. Duke ordered that the parts of the whale that did not taste good be marinated with ginger and other spices, and then sold to the commoners at a low price. That low price made most of the poor people who could only eat black bread able to afford whale meat. Whale meat, which wasn't too fishy, became one of the main sources of food for the poor in Storm City. Improving their meals was originally something that the poor could only dream of, but this in turn stimulated even more commoners to join Duke's whaling fleet. With the support of sufficient funds, Storm City, which never lacked labor, launched 3 major projects at the same time. The first was to build a huge stone dock. The dock was 30 meters wide, and the farthest end was 100 meters long. The overall shape was similar to a huge king character. There were 5 such docks, which could accommodate more than 60 medium-sized ships at the same time. The second was the expansion of Storm City's military port. In consideration of the invasion of foreign enemies, the military port was built as a safe haven, with 2 huge sluices at the outermost ring. The third was the shipyard. The huge shipyard could build 3 large ships of nearly 50 meters at the same time. Of the 3 projects, the dock was the fastest to be completed. Originally, dumping stones into the sea, driving piles, and fixing the foundation of the dock were extremely time-consuming and laborious. However, a miracle happened. Every evening, when the workers finished their work, the next morning, they would find that the piles had been firmly driven into the stone seabed at the bottom of the beach. There were even people who wandered around at night who reported to the city guards that there seemed to be large creatures appearing in the water at night in Stormport. However, the guards did not receive a single report of casualties. Once, a drunkard lost his footing and fell into the sea in the middle of the night. As a result, he was sent to the beach when the tide was low. Well, it was the kind of creature that suddenly flew out of the sea, drew a parabola in the air, and then landed on the beach where there were people on the beach. The 2 old sailors looked like they had seen a ghost. Then, Windsor went to advise them, and even avoided reporting to the city guards. However, Lothar still summoned Duque once because of this. Storm City has never rejected friendly foreigners. Mr. Duke Marcus, are you sure you don't need to add some Naga names to your employee list? Sir, I don't think that's necessary for the time being. Duque replied humbly. Actually, I have a hunch that you want more than money and reputation. Lothar said calmly. What I want will not harm the interests of Storm City. On the contrary, we should be one. Time will prove everything. Duque still replied calmly. Lothar sighed. Well, it seems that you have a unique view on maritime affairs. You are much more proficient than a non-swimmer like me. The plan of the port that you submitted, all of my captains think that it is perfect. As for the design of the civil port, I will leave it to you. We are also willing to listen to your opinions on the military port. Just like that, as the designer of the new storm port, Duque was given more autonomy. First, Duque set a direction for the entire port, be it people or goods, to move clockwise. This would avoid chaos, and it would be the same if the time came. Between the military port and the civil port, Duque thoughtfully suggested to build a moat to separate the civil port for the sake of militarization and confidentiality. In addition, a large number of antlers and tall walls should be built. To the south of the military port was the civil port. All the warehouses were set between the military port and the civil port. Intentionally or unintentionally, Duque left a huge passage between the gates of Storm City and the port that could allow 100 people to walk side by side at the same time. Next to the warehouses was a 50-meter isolation belt, and then the city walls of Storm City. Inside the city walls was the newly built fish market. After all this was done, 3 months had passed. Suddenly, a new piece of news came. At the upcoming New Year's banquet, Mediv, who had suddenly returned, would attend. Chapter 63. Mediv is back. For most of the nobles and mages in Stormwind, it was not a rare thing. In fact, not many of them were overly worried. The powerful guardian of Azeroth would not be an issue of safety at all. And it was not the first time that he had disappeared without a word in recent years to travel alone. Hence, when Mediv returned, everyone's reaction was only, "Oh, he's back." Everyone's focus was on Duque. It was very simple. To everyone, Mediv was more like a mortal looking up at a glory that was above the clouds. It was something that could be seen but not reached. In the past year, all the commoners and even the nobles who were not doing well had idolized Duque, who had built everything from scratch. The youngest Earth Mage, a member of the Royal Mages, the king who ruled the western wilderness against the sea, the undisputed owner of the Pearl Sea route, the inventor of Chanel perfume, there were so many halos on the same young man. It was rumored that King Lang had decided to grant Duque the title of a knight. For Duque, who was born as a commoner, it was definitely a meteoric rise. At least, that was how the nobles saw it. In the past year, Duque had opened up the Pearl Sea route and provided a large amount of additional taxes for Stormwind. Even though Lang had given Duque a great deal of preferential treatment, the tax of nearly 100,000 gold coins still made Lang's tax officer dizzy. Not only were the walls of Stormwind City being repaired, but even the storm fortress that had not been repaired for many years was also benefiting from it. The stonemasons of the Stonemason Guild were all grateful for Duque's greatness. Originally, Duque did not have the qualifications to attend the New Year's banquet, but Lang and Andoin jointly sent an invitation to Duque. Saturday, 8:00 p.m. Outside the storm fort, carriages slowly approached. The carriages were pulled by tall and strong horses. Just the backs of the horses were almost as tall as a person. Every horse's fur shone with a healthy luster, and almost every horse's fur was combed neatly. Some horses' manes were even arranged into braids. There were all kinds of carriages. Regardless of whether they were extravagant or low-key and exquisite, it was obvious that they had been renovated. Many of the carriages even smelled of freshly swept paint. Each carriage was engraved with their family's emblem. Each emblem represented their history and glory. Under the watchful eyes of the Storm City guards in brand new armor, the well-dressed noble gentlemen and ladies came down from their carriages and walked on the long red carpet. Some entered directly under the guidance of the emissaries, but most of them greeted each other at the entrance of the majestic storm stronghold. The small circles were obviously abnormal. "Duke for Dragon, I didn't expect you to come so early." A middle-aged man bowed to a young man with reddish-brown hair and a black tuxedo. The other nobles around him were also very respectful towards this young noble. This was because he was the head of the Fordragon family, one of the largest families in Stormwind. He had inherited the title of Duke at a young age, Bolvar Fordragon. His mother, on the other hand, was a very famous noble lady in the upper echelons of the kingdom. Bolvar returned the noble's elegant bow. "Yes, Earl Carton. I heard that we can see the Sea King Duque today, so I came early." Earl Carton couldn't help but feel a little awkward. The Brando family was his vassal, but he quickly changed the topic and talked about something else. Unfortunately, all the big topics in Stormwind recently revolved around one person, Duke Marcus. "I heard that King Rin and Lothar agreed to let Duke Marcus come to the banquet in his own special carriage. I'd like to see what kind of carriage it is." No one knew which noble said this, but the result was that all the nobles couldn't help but look into the distance. Then, they finally saw an unfamiliar carriage. "Oh my God, what is that?" On the canal that traversed the entire inner city of Stormwind, something that was neither a ship nor a carriage floated over. It wasn't a ship because it didn't have a bow or a stern. It wasn't a carriage because it was moving on the river. If one had to say what it looked like, it was more like a palanquin. This was because it was supported by 4 huge male Nagas. On a normal day, such a strange carriage would have been attacked by Stormwind City's guards. But today, no one would attack them. This was because the carriage was also engraved with a coat of arms. It was imprinted with arcane magic, so it couldn't be counterfeited. The outer ring was a purple circle, and in the middle was a spiral lightning symbol that symbolized arcane magic. The rich arcane light showed that the owner of the carriage was sitting in the carriage. This was the coat of arms of the Royal Magic Academy's esteemed old wizard, Norton. Next to this coat of arms was a coat of arms that the nobles had never seen before. The pattern was very simple. It was a blue storm that looked like a tornado. It was carried by 4 majestic Nagas, and at the front sat a coachman wearing the standard Stormwind apprentice knight uniform. This strange carriage followed the canal and arrived in front of Stormwind's stronghold. On the small dock of the stronghold, the Nagas swayed their huge snake tails and proudly carried the carriage to the long red carpet in the stronghold's reception hall. Stormwind City's guards stood on both sides without any special expression. It was obvious that they had been informed early in the morning. Some people recognized that the coachman was the slightly famous knight candidate, Reginald Windsor. The carriage was put down gently. Windsor jumped down nimbly and opened the door. Under the watchful eyes of the nobles, a black-haired young man in a blue-white mage robe with golden edges came down first. Then, he welcomed a tall, middle-aged woman in an elegant cream-colored evening gown with an impeccable posture. She had long blonde hair that was tied up behind her head. Her facial features weren't exquisite, but it gave people a very pleasant and comfortable feeling. She was Elizabeth Jones, whom all the noble ladies in Stormwind City liked to interact with. The second to come down was the old wizard with the staff, Norton. However, the focus of the people's attention was still on Duque. Seeing the four majestic Nagas carry the carriage away and stand with Windsor in the line of coachmen, the group of nobles was surprised and a little amused. Then should the huge Naga be the coachman? Or the horse? Duke Balver's lips curled into a strange smile. What an interesting fellow. At this moment, a strong burst of arcane energy suddenly burst out in front of the red carpet. A magic circle with a diameter of 4 meters suddenly appeared. After a brief flash of arcane magic, a figure that everyone was both familiar and unfamiliar with appeared. Guardian of Azeroth, Medivh. Chapter 64. The reaction of the royal guards of Stormwind City was a benchmark after the blue-purple arcane light and the flowing light ribbons filled with runes floated away. As the royal guards who had witnessed Medivh's magnificent appearance countless times, they did not move at first, but in the next moment, at least 10 guards chose to hold their spears horizontally at high speed. The steel spears in their hands that were more than 2 meters long were never just for decoration. But halfway through their stances, they clearly showed signs of hesitation. Every guard recognized that it was indeed Medivh, but they all had doubts. Under that face that they had seen many times, was it really the same soul? In the past, no matter how strong Medivh was, he always had a modest, kind, and comforting face. Some people even suspected that he was not a powerful mage, but an artist. Now, his chin was slightly raised, his gaze as sharp as a knife. With a fierce arrogance, he swept his gaze around with the aura of a king. Unlike the blue and white mage robe that symbolized the glory of court mages that he often attended formal occasions, today he wore a cloak made of soft black feathers, a very casual mage robe made of velvet. His hair was not properly combed, and it looked a bit like a chicken nest. Most importantly, there was not a single emblem of Stormwind on him. This was the most important New Year's banquet for the upper nobles of the kingdom. On this occasion where etiquette was the most important, as the closest comrade of King Lang, the highest existence in the field of magic in the kingdom, Medivh actually did not give face and did not even bring anything to show his status as a court mage of Stormwind. Not just the guards, but even the nobles were stunned. No matter how arrogant they were, they would not forget that the reason they could live such a comfortable life was inseparable from the protection of Medivh. In the north, Kuel Salis, Alterac and other areas all had the presence of troll clans. It should be said that most countries had the existence of organized foreign enemies, only Stormwind was the most comfortable. This was largely because of the existence of Medivh. What the hell was Medivh doing now? For a moment, the atmosphere at the scene froze. Medivh did not care about the gazes of the nobles and guards at all. He, or rather Sargeras, looked with interest at Duque not far away. "Hey, didn't expect to see you here." "Duque, kid." "Kid?" Duque's eyelids twitched. He saw the words in the system prompt, "You have received deep attention from Medivh, who is completely controlled by Sargeras." He bowed to Sargeras and said in a clear voice, "I didn't expect to see you here either, respected guardian. I heard that you were missing. During the time you were traveling alone, everyone was worried about you. Although it feels like you're a different person when we meet again, it doesn't matter. The Guardian's health is the guarantee of the kingdom and even the world of Azeroth. Sargeras was amused by Duke's words, which were neither servile nor overbearing, but seemed to have a hidden meaning to them. He cast his gaze on the Nagas beside Duke's carriage. Facing Sargeras's aggressive gaze, the 4 majestic Nagas trembled involuntarily, with deep fear in their eyes. They didn't know that this fear from their souls was because their ancestors, a group of elves with the High Elf Queen Azhara as the core, had been loyal to Sargeras. Sargeras didn't care about the Nagas, who were weak and incompetent in his eyes. He smiled and pointed at Duke. Only power is eternal. It's meaningless to rely on these beast-like monsters to fight for the so-called Sea King title. As for the Nagas, I can destroy them all with one finger. Duke's hard work in the past 6 months was belittled, but Duke wasn't angry. He said pointedly, "There is nothing on this land that you can't destroy." As soon as this was said, even the nobles gasped. Duke really dared to say that. Was he accusing Medivh, the guardian of the world, of being the most terrifying existence? There were also a few nobles who were gloating. They had had enough of Duke's glory, and had enough of not being able to deal with Duke, who was under the triple protection of Lang, Lothar, and Medivh. This made them see the priceless pearl route, but they couldn't touch it. Now Duke actually had a conflict with Medivh. Good news. Great news. Unexpectedly, Medivh wasn't angry at all. He seemed to be in a good mood because of Duke's words. Ha ha ha. Kid, you'll know one day that only power is eternal. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. The arrogant laughter was like that of a night owl. It was hair-raising, and the atmosphere at the scene became much colder. At this time, the mighty and majestic Anduin Lothar arrived. He was wearing a blue and white knight's suit. He seemed to have seen Medivh's strange behavior. He still walked over. Out of his sensitivity to evil, he almost subconsciously held the scabbard with his left hand, and pressed his left thumb against the blade. This was a completely unconscious action, but it was noticed by many observant people. Medivh? Anduin said in a probing tone. Yo, my old friend. Medivh, who was controlled by Sargeras, had a slightly mocking expression on his face. Immediately after, he put on a warm expression and opened his arms. Because he was still wearing the black feather cloak, he looked like a goshawk pouncing on its prey. Anduin resisted the strange and ominous intuition in his heart, and his body stiffly accepted the hug of Medivh. Seeing this scene, Duque secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that there probably wouldn't be anything major tonight. Demon King Sargeras had endless life, and it wasn't the first time he failed to invade Azeroth. Every failure made him extremely ashamed and angry. 10,000 years of hatred had long been imprinted in the soul of the Demon King. Even if he had already controlled the world's strongest mage, Medivh, and mastered that terrifying magic, Sargeras still felt that it wasn't enough. A simple massacre was no longer enough to fill the anger in his heart. He wanted to play with every existence in this world, make them fall under the conspiracy, and make them beg and worship him in pain and despair. So, today, Sargeras would still be the last Medivh. Not caring about Duque anymore, Sargeras took the strange staff that Medivh was most famous for, Atish Guardian's legendary staff, and walked affectionately with Noxus on the red carpet into the banquet hall. Looking at Atish Guardian's legendary staff, Duque was in a trance, as if he had returned to the years in the game. The Atish in real life was just as ugly as he was now. The entire staff was dark orange, and the head of the staff was like a chicken leg. It was long and slender, and slightly taller than a human. The biggest feature was that every once in a while, there would be 3 translucent crows circling not too high above the head of the staff. Duque was a little embarrassed, but his heart was burning with eagerness. He didn't know if he would have the chance to obtain this one and only artifact like in the game in this life. Chapter 65. What was the point of defeating the boss? Fame. Equipment. A sense of achievement. Even though Duque had transmigrated and entered the world of Azeroth, it still could not extinguish his gamer's heart. A divine artifact was no longer just a powerful piece of equipment. It had been sublimated into a kind of spirituality. A seemingly arrogant idea surged uncontrollably into Duque's mind: get rid of the Mediv possessed by Sardras and snatch Atish. Thinking of the wonderful feeling of the divine artifact magic staff, thinking of the world-shocking magical boost, Duque's heart could not calm down at all. Phew. Duque exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Beside him, Elizabeth Jones and old wizard Norton, who had been invited along, had expressions of concern on their faces. "Are you all right?" they asked in unison. Duque knew that they were not asking about him, but his relationship with the Mediv. "I'll be fine." Duque's confident tone gave them confidence. Completely ignoring the gloating looks of some of the nobles, Duque strode into the banquet hall with Norton and Jones under the guidance of a waiter. After today, there would most likely be various interpretations of this in the noble circle. Duque had no interest in those political games. Towards this group of unlucky fellows, Duque almost ignored them. He only silently let the system elf record their various information. The luxurious banquet hall was slightly larger than a football field. Not only was it resplendent, but the tall ceiling was full of magnificent murals. Humans used such an artistic form to record civilization and history. On the huge dome murals, Duque saw the 7 kingdoms of the humans, the high elves' Kuel Salis, the dwarves' iron furnace fort, and Thoradin the Great defeating the Troll Empire. Duque was so fascinated by the murals that it made Lady Jones beside him anxious. "Yo, my sea king. The New Year's banquet is a very important gathering of the nobles. Although I know that you have a high status as a mage, having a good relationship with the nobles is beneficial to the expansion of our business. I'm begging you, for the sake of your Magus Tower, at least come with me to visit a few of the most important nobles." It was already an open secret that Duque was earning money to build the Magus Tower. It was precisely because of this perfect excuse that the neutral nobles no longer held a grudge against Duque. With Jones, who was very popular among the noble ladies, the perfume was selling like hotcakes. However, Duque shook his head at Jones and said, "Something big is going to happen tonight. I suggest you put away your thoughts of promoting your business first." Jones' body suddenly stiffened. Even after so many months of happy cooperation, she still couldn't figure out what this young man was thinking. His mind was detached from the world, and his eyes always seemed to fall on a place beyond the imagination of the world. Lady Jones didn't dare to disobey Duque. After all, Duque was almost her boss, and 90% of her business was related to Duque. At this time, the messenger announced, "King Lang and his wife have arrived." Lang, who was wearing a dazzling golden robe, held the hand of the beautiful queen and his children, and walked into the hall with the guards opening the way. On the high platform that had long been prepared, the bright light of the huge candlesticks allowed everyone to clearly see the details of every gold ornament on King Lang. Lang was full of smiles. The situation of the kingdom had improved, and the return of his friend Mediv had put him in a good mood. Everyone could feel the king's success. "Guests, all the people of the kingdom, welcome here. I, Lang Rin, am pleased to host the New Year's banquet here. In the past year, the whole kingdom has been prosperous, and the people have lived a better life than before. Here, I would like to make a grand introduction to everyone and thank a young man. He is our new member of the royal family's mages, the new Earth Mage, the owner of the Pearl Line, the sponsor of the new port of Stormwind, and the sponsor of the Stormwind Navy ships, Duke Marcus. Mr. Marcus, please come on stage." Lang opened his palm and pointed at Duque. Duque was also a little stunned. He didn't expect that Lang would introduce him to the entire noble class so grandly. This was definitely the king's favor. Suddenly becoming the focus of everyone's attention, Duque was also a little flattered. His slightly opened mouth showed his nervousness. "Don't be nervous, young man. You deserve it." The handsome Anjuan Lothar came near Duque and patted Duque on the shoulder, encouraging him to go on stage. After Duque came back to his senses, the sly Anjuan whispered, I publicly support you because of the city wall. Duque didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lothar. Can you not be so snobbish? Are you thinking about how to suck blood from me next year? Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Duque went on stage. King Lang smiled at Duque and patted Duque's shoulder affectionately. He then slowly pulled out his golden sword that looked like an eagle spreading its wings. Please kneel, young man. Kneel? Kneel for what? Duque couldn't react at all. Lothar, who was next to Duque, was still alert. He whispered, His Majesty wants to confer a title on you. If you want to refuse, you can choose not to kneel. Is this considered a surprise attack? I've already transmigrated to this world and can't go back. I can either integrate into this world or be rejected by this world. There is no third option. All right. It's a title, after all. I'll just kneel then. After a brief daze, Duque still decided to kneel on one knee. King Lang was very satisfied. His half-squinted eyes were full of smiles. He brandished his gorgeous sword and tapped on Duque's left and right shoulders with the sides of the sword. Duke Marcus, I don't care where you come from, but since you are willing to serve Stormwind and offer your courage and wisdom for the benefit of the people of the kingdom, for the sake of the smiling faces of the people, I confer you the title of Knight. I hope that you will continue to serve faithfully from now on and create more wealth and happiness for the kingdom and the people. Lang's words made Duque feel very comfortable. I, Duke Marcus, am willing to serve the people of Stormwind. No one noticed that Duque cleverly followed Lang's words and avoided the words kingdom and king. He only said to serve the people. Lang was very happy. Sir Marcus, I didn't mean to squeeze you. But the life of the people of the kingdom is still difficult. I hope you can perform better next year. I will. Duque stood up. He could really feel the envy, jealousy, and hatred coming from all directions. Conferring a title as a commoner, it was often only by making great military contributions that one would be promoted from the knight class. But Duque had completely bypassed the knight class and directly entered the realm of the true aristocracy. This was inseparable from his covert expansion of territory in Stormwind. Chapter 66. There was no doubt that Duque was the focus of the banquet. Even though Mediva's disciple, Khadgar, had officially become an earth mage, he did not change the topic. This was because Duque had become an earth mage at the age of 14, and now he was faintly touching the bottleneck of becoming a sky mage. No matter how hard Khadgar worked, and even though he had more knowledge than Duque, he had only become an earth mage at the age of 15. If it wasn't for Duque, he would have been the focus of the entire kingdom's upper echelons. Unfortunately, there was Duque. No matter how talented a genius was, in front of Duque, they would be overshadowed. Out of respect for Mediv, the nobles congratulated him verbally, but Khadgar could clearly hear the nobles' whispered comments. What? Compared to a true genius, Khadgar is only at this level. Lower your voice. After all, Duque is comparable to Mediva's 9th grade aptitude. Didn't you see that Mediv also said that he wanted to take Duque as his disciple? Khadgar should be happy. If Duque had become Mediva's disciple, would he still have the resources he has now? In the end, Khadgar was still a 15-year-old child. Even if he had a complicated past, he could not be as mature and steady as an adult. His forced smile could not hide his disappointment. He suddenly longed for Mediva's comfort. Only Mediv, the strongest mage in the world, the wisest and most forgiving senior, could give him comfort. He turned his head, as if he had been struck by lightning. What did he see? A cold master. If it was a dignified one, then so be it. But Mediv, who he had not seen for months, had a ridiculing expression on his face as if it had nothing to do with him. What happened to Master? Khadgar was stunned. Before the banquet officially entered the ball stage, there was still one more segment, and that was for the nobles or invited guests to present gifts to the king. Generally speaking, King Lang knew how to conduct himself. After all, this was a segment where the poor begged for tips, while the rich begged to show off. Presents were not just simple gifts. For example, if a poor fellow presented a poem of praise to the queen or the little prince or the little princess, they could also receive a reward from the king. Dumbfounded, Duque watched as a minor noble said to the king, "The beautiful queen is like the stars in the sky, blinking like a frog, blinking." He didn't know if there was a problem with the system elf's translation, or if it was a lousy poem. Anyway, Lang used a few gold coins to send this guy away amidst the laughter of the nobles. It should be the latter. It seemed that there were still different grades for performing. Duque also presented his gift. The ceremonial officer had seen Duque's gift before the banquet and decisively announced that Duque's gift would be the finale. Unfortunately, the Mediv also said that he wanted to present a gift, so Duque's gift was ranked second to last. The ceremonial officer first presented a gold-inlaid camphor wood box and a tray covered with red velvet to Lang. The strong camphor aroma of the camphor wood, with a cool and slightly spicy taste, had already shocked the spirits of Lang and the queen. "This is?" Lang asked with a smile. Duque spread his hand and motioned for the ceremonial officer to open it, and the nobles suddenly let out a whisper of envy. It was a snow-white pearl frost. It had whitening, acne, and freckle effects. This was a new gadget that had just become popular in the past week, and all the noble ladies who had used it said it was good. Under the manipulation of the pair of profiteers, Duque and Jones, this new gadget, a small round box the size of the palm of the hand, sold for almost 20 gold coins. Now, Duque had given several kilograms to the queen. The queen could clearly hear the exclamations of the noble ladies. The queen's eyes had already turned into crescent moons from smiling. "Oh, Sir Marcus has spent a lot. For the queen's beauty, everything is worth it." Duque gave a deep bow. It was really a lot of money. He didn't even know if he had spent a few of Duke's copper coins. Perhaps it was because he had lost his moral integrity and had not replied, but Duque also felt that he had become a profiteer. Pearl frost was said to be made from the most precious pearl powder. But would Duque, who had been misled by profiteers, use so much pearl powder when he went to CX Island before transmigrating? Don't even think about it. The composition of the pearl powder was the same as the composition of the layer of pearl membrane on the clam shell. The so-called pearl powder was scraped off the clam shell. In CX Island, those who knew their stuff would not buy pearl powder, because the pearl powder on the market could be bought for 15 gold coins from the fishermen who raised artificial pearls. In the eyes of the Storm King, Queen, and the nobles, that box of pearl frost was priceless. The most expensive thing was actually that box. Of course, Duque would not divulge this secret. As for what was offered to the king, it was a goose-egg-sized spherical pearl with a flawless, warm, and exquisite color. Under the bright candlelight, it exuded a soft halo. It was precisely this natural gentle beauty, as well as this elusive mysterious charm and elegant temperament, that reminded people of the extreme gentleness of a woman. Seeing this big pearl, every aristocrat revealed a look of yearning and envy. Such a beautiful pearl, even if it was presented to the kings of the 7 kingdoms, it would still give them a lot of face. Lang was also stunned, his face full of excitement. This fellow Duque was really thoughtful. Such a gorgeous pearl was enough to be inlaid on the crown. "Dear subject, you have spent a lot of money. I just happened to pick it up. Only you, your majesty, are worthy of such a gorgeous pearl." Duque bowed deeply and let his face the floor. It was not that Duque was so polite, but rather that he was afraid that he would not be able to control himself and laugh. Before transmigrating, who didn't know that the bigger and more beautiful a pearl was, the more fake it was. Pearls were formed when a mussel opened its shell to absorb sand and other foreign substances. The foreign substances stimulated the mussel shell to secrete nacreous substance. Wasn't it easy to make a pearl round? Just get a larger glass bead inside, and the rest of the mussel shell would be done by itself. Now, Duque had a few giant mussels that were more than 2 meters long in the western wilderness. Duque had already asked Vara to make a hole in the shell to lock the muscles. As long as Duque wanted, Duque could even make a pearl the size of a human head. Speaking of which, Duque was so good at conducting himself purely because Duque wanted to make things difficult for Medivh, who was controlled by Sargeras. Duque had already vaguely guessed what Medivh was going to offer next. He wanted to hold up the hearts of Lang and Anduin first, and when Medivh threw their hearts down, they would be more deeply and in more pain. After receiving the king's praise, and after Lang promised to give more convenience to Duque, Duque retreated. The focus of the audience fell on Medivh, who had been looking at the audience with a faint smile and an unfriendly gaze. Chapter 67. Lang, who was in a good mood, slapped his thigh on the throne and smiled. "All right, Medivh, my old friend, the guardian of Azeroth. Logically, there shouldn't be any formalities between us. But since you said you wanted to present a gift, then come. I also want to see what you've specially found." There was a cruel smile on Medivh's face, which gave Lang a bad feeling. Not to mention Lang, even Anduin could not help but take a step forward. As childhood friends who had been friends for decades, they should not have such a reaction. But the ominous aura that was so bad that it was almost leaking out made them instinctively reject Medivh's approach. Medivh did not make a move. He opened his hand and suddenly conjured a large hourglass that was as long as his forearm and placed it in the hands of the ceremonial officer. It was a strange transparent hourglass. Inside the light brown birch shell was a glass hourglass. But the sand in the hourglass was shockingly black. Black sand that exuded an ominous and destructive aura. Shah, shah, shah. The sand kept pouring down, but the sand at the top of the hourglass slowed down very slowly. Rather than saying it was an hourglass, it was more like a strange magical device that was counting down. Seeing this iconic hourglass, Duque only felt his heart beating violently. This heartbeat was so violent that it felt like it was about to jump out of his chest. At the same time, his black pupils shrank to the smallest as he stared at the hourglass. "Hey! Medivh, from the first time I saw you today, I felt that something was wrong with you. What the hell are you doing?" Anduin Lothar walked forward. Unknowingly, he had quietly put on a suit of armor. Although it was also a ceremonial armor, it was still armor. One had to know that he was only wearing a knight's attire before the opening. Now, the future Azeroth lion, Anduin Lothar, was vaguely blocking the path between Medivh and Lang. He held the scabbard in his left hand and was in the posture of drawing his sword at any time. "Old friend, if it's a cold joke, isn't it a little too bad? Tonight is the New Year's banquet." Lang spread his hands, as if trying to smooth things over. The Medivh didn't appreciate it at all. His face was full of mockery and ridicule. "You will know what this is in the future." With a gentle poke of his slender and thin fingers, the black hourglass was overturned in front of the ceremonial official who was holding the plate with both hands, as well as the gazes of Duque, the king's family, Anduin, and the other nobles. Clatter. The enormous hourglass fell to the ground and turned upside down. Logically speaking, the sand in the hourglass should flow in the opposite direction under the influence of gravity. But no. Defying gravity, the sand flowed from the bottom to the top, still maintaining the same rhythm, grain by grain, handful by handful. Everyone's eyes suddenly froze, and everyone's heart almost forgot to beat. Fear, uneasiness, and deep confusion gripped everyone's heart. The strong negative emotions almost made Lang's chest explode. He pressed his left hand on the pauldron on Anduin's right shoulder, as if he wanted to push Anduin away and ask Medivh face to face. However, Lothar's bulging muscles told Lang that the leader of the Royal Knights had already entered a combat-ready state. King Lang couldn't help but stiffen. Without doing anything to Lang, Medivh's face was filled with endless arrogance and a touch of evil. Without saying another word, Medivh snapped his fingers with his left hand amidst a burst of owl-like laughter. In an instant, his entire body disappeared. He turned into countless black crows that flew all over the sky, making unpleasant cawing sounds, and swaggered away under the shocked gazes of hundreds of nobles. Countless black crow feathers floated in the air. They spread an ominous and gloomy aura to everyone present. Banquet? Can the banquet still go on? Even if the chief protocol officer was extremely tactful and let the band play with cheerful music to slightly dilute the ominous aura. Unfortunately, no one would be in a good mood when they saw the black crow feathers on the ground and the hourglass that could actually flow sand in reverse. King Lang couldn't even hide his anger and confusion. He tried to continue with the banquet, but the attempt only lasted for 15 seconds. Lang nodded to the people below and left with his family. Following closely behind Lang's footsteps was the loyal Anjuan Lothar, as well as dozens of fully armed royal knights who had arrived at the periphery of the venue. They were like a moving fortress, surrounding the king as he left. The banquet was not a good one. The nobles were also in a bad mood and dispersed one after another. "Let's go," Duque said to Madame Jones and old mage Norton, and was about to leave. Suddenly, 3 figures deliberately blocked in front of Duque and the others. Duque was stunned. He suddenly realized that he didn't know the person who was leading the group. The high-ranking noble with brown parting hair nodded at Duque. "Hello, I am Duke Bolvar for Dragon." Upon hearing this name, Duque's heart trembled. Bolvar was not just any Tom, Dick, or Harry. In the original history of Azeroth, Bolvar would first become the regent of Stormwind, responsible for taking care of the young King Varian Rin. Later on, Bolvar was ambushed while fighting against the Scourge Legion, and the expeditionary army he led was wiped out. He was lucky enough to survive with an inhuman body. The Lich King tried to turn him into a Death Knight, but he thought that his great will resisted the Lich King. Later on, after the Lich King's death, in order to suppress the Scourge Legion, he took the initiative to use his own body as a seal and became the next Lich King. It could be said that Bolvar for Dragon was the model of a holy knight, a model of human virtue. Toward such an existence, even if he was not as great as he would be in the future, Duque couldn't help but feel deep veneration. "Hello, I am." Duque's sudden change in reaction was strange, but Bolvar didn't pay much attention to it, because he had more important things to do. "Sir Marcus, may I come a little closer?" Duque was puzzled, but still nodded. Bolvar moved closer and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry to interrupt your journey, but Sir Anjuan Lothar specifically asked you to come with me to the inner palace to discuss the matter with His Majesty." Duque was a little embarrassed. "Am I being targeted by Lothar and King Rin?" Duque turned his head and looked at Old Man Norton. The old man was tactful. "Then I will send Madame Jones back first. Windsor and your coachman will be waiting for you there." "My apologies, Wizard Norton is also on His Majesty's list of enlistments," Bolvar added. Madame Jones tactfully gave a ladylike bow. "Then I will let the guard send me back." Chapter 68. Walking along the long corridor of the Storm Fortress, Duque and Norton were not in the mood to admire the gorgeous corridor. Even though the murals in the corridor were so exquisite and the gold ornaments so gorgeous, what they noticed was that every guard of the Wang family had changed into a set of armor for the battle. As the guard of honor of the Wang family, every guard had a set of armor that was specially used for ceremonial purposes. The exquisite carvings, the long cloak, and the bright blue tassel on the helmet were all eye-catching, but Lothar, who knew soldiers very well, knew that every restraint on the battlefield was a fine line between life and death. What's more, there were so many of them. This set of armor was extremely simple and unadorned. Not only was it convenient to move around, but even every pattern was hand-painted with paint. It was not the kind that would create a whoosh in the air when it was waved around. Purely for the sake of aesthetics, a robe that could be torn apart easily was worn over the armor. The guards' eyes were filled with vigilance, and they even prepared spare lanterns at their feet. The Storm Fortress was a fortress that was both a palace and a fortress. When they reached the deepest part of the fortress, Duque was shocked to find that in addition to the 16 strong guards of the Wang family standing guard in front of the gate, there were also 2 mages with strong magical waves. Sky mages. Sky mages were actually here to guard the gate. One could imagine how much Mediva's move had agitated Lang. Seeing that Bolvar had brought Duque and Norton over, one of the guards took out 2 scrolls. One of the mages gently tapped on the scrolls, and 2 holographic portraits immediately appeared in the air. It was the portrait of Duque and Norton. Under the bright light, 8 guards stared at Duque and Norton with their eyes wide open for a full 5 seconds, and then nodded at the same time to let them pass. Almost at the same time the gate opened. Duque and Andoin heard the argument between Lang and Andoin. Thoradin the Great above, Andoin, are you allergic? We've known Mediv for more than 30 years. Just because we've known him for more than 30 years, we all think he's in danger? Right now, not only the 2 of us, but also all the guards and nobles present were blind and insane. They were all seeing an illusion. Or did something happen to Mediv? Andoin was equally furious as he glared at King Lang. Then all the more reason why we should look for the Mediv and ask him, instead of doubting him like a despicable villain. Lang slammed his fist on the hard long table. Did he respond to your call? Your Majesty. Did he respond to you when you showed him the king's token to summon the guardian and your magic message? In the past, no matter how much he traveled alone, there would always be a magic reply. Andoin's hair and beard fluttered in anger. Like a lion with its paws on the table, he roared at the king mercilessly. At this moment, an old man beside Lang, who was also wearing a court mage's robe, interrupted, "There's no problem with the magic transmission. It's the guardian who refused to respond." Lang was suddenly speechless. He slumped on the throne and rubbed his brows in annoyance. Then, he saw Duque and Norton, who were led into the inner palace by Bolvar. "All right, let's put the news about Mediv aside before we confirm that there's a big problem with him. Now, I know Mage Norton's wisdom. Then, Andoin, can you tell me why even Sir Marcus was invited?" Anduin Lothar seemed to have restrained his temper. He glanced at Duque thoughtfully. "Because I realized that the moment the black hourglass appeared, his reaction was the most unique among everyone present." Lang frowned. "All right, let me ask again. Now, apart from Duque, who else here knows what this black hourglass is? Does it symbolize something?" At the table, there were 10 white-haired old men. Some of them were publicly acknowledged as wise men, some were historians, and some were knowledgeable old mages. Then, everyone took another careful look. Even Norton shook his head. In the next moment, all eyes were focused on Duque's face. Duque knew he was in big trouble. That's right, he was the only one who knew the truth. If his deduction was not wrong, this was the hourglass that would become famous in later generations. It was the hourglass that marked the opening of the Dark Portal for the first time and the Orcs' invasion of the Azeroth continent. But, could he say it? Publicly accuse Mediv, the childhood friend of the king and the head of the military, the strongest mage in the world, and the guardian of Azeroth, of having his soul taken over by Sardras? One step earlier, you're Superman. 100 steps earlier, you're a demon, and you'll be burned at the stake. Before transmigration, was this rare in the Middle Ages? Copernicus proposed the heliocentric theory and was burned to death. If he, Duque, was burned at the stake, who could guarantee that he wouldn't be discovered after his resurrection? Wanted by the 7 kingdoms at the same time? After thinking for a long time, Duque raised his head and said in a low voice, "The moment I saw the hourglass, I saw an illusion." Illusion? What illusion? At this moment, Duque invited the Oscar to possess him. At this moment, Duque was a fraud. He was a prophet. His voice became ethereal and ethereal. Ominous. Death. And war. Everyone knew that this hourglass was evil. But death and war, these 2 words were serious. How long had it been since there was a real war on the continent? In the north, there were conflicts with the trolls every year. Most of them were small conflicts with a few dozen people. Sometimes, a sentry post was smashed or a border station was attacked. But there were no battles with more than 1,000 people. Why did Duque mention the word war? The illusion I saw only lasted for a short moment. It was a heroic Stormwind soldier being smashed into meat paste by a huge monster with a hammer larger than my body. As soon as Duque finished speaking, an old man mocked, "Are you sure you didn't see your naga?" This was already a personal attack. Duque immediately put him on the Brando family's kill list, but his tone was still humble. "I'm sorry, it was a giant monster with 2 arms and 2 legs, just like you. But you can only reach his waist." Without saying anything more, Duque bowed to the king. If not for the Mediva's insolence, this would have been a slander. Lang looked at Andoin, but Andoin spread out his hands. "Look, I'm not the only one with such a premonition of danger." At this time, Bolvar for Dragon also stepped forward. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, please forgive me for being blunt." "Speak." At that moment, I also felt Mediva's contempt and hostility towards Your Majesty and the entire kingdom. Chapter 69. Lang knew Bolvar well. He was a righteous, self-disciplined young man who could be called a model of chivalry. As an important minister of the kingdom, Bolvar's attitude was also very important. Ryan nodded a little dejectedly. "Well, if there's no new opinion, then everyone except the cabinet members, please leave first. Our cabinet is having an emergency meeting." Duque and the fellow who was staring at him, and the group of people who were not part of the kingdom's core power left under the escort of the guards. Duque was no longer concerned about the outcome of the discussion between King Lang and his ministers. Walking out of the storm fortress, Duque looked up in the cold night wind and saw a huge statue not far from the storm fortress. It was a statue of the guardian of Azeroth, Mediv. It was built to commemorate the great Mediva's 20 years of guarding Stormwind. Ironically, the guardian of the entire kingdom and the world was now about to become the culprit behind the destruction of the world. As the person who was about to witness this scene, Duque also felt a spicy taste in his mouth. Old Norton came to Duque's side. Just as he was about to say something, Duque said, "Let's go. I still want to continue to ask for advice on how to advance to a Sky Mage." "Duque, aren't you a little too anxious?" Duque shook his head and did not speak. Because the system elf had determined that there were exactly 100 days left before all the sand in the black hourglass was emptied. Perhaps it was because of Duque's transmigration that history had changed greatly, and the incident at the dark portal had been brought forward. Duque did not have much time left. In the depths of the storm fortress behind Duque, the king and his ministers were red in the face, but there was no constructive result. 3 days later, Duque suddenly received a secret summons from the king. In the secret guest room of the storm fortress, there were only 5 people in the room: King Lang, Andoin, Bolvar, and an old mage who was probably the guard. The young Bolvar for Dragon was the first to speak. "Sir Marcus, I would not have told you this, but Lothar insisted on asking your opinion. I hope you will not disappoint us." Duque nodded in understanding. He knew very well that among the big shots of the kingdom, a small mage like him would not have the right to speak. At the end of the day, in their eyes, the overly young Benjamin was just a rookie, a mage who knew how to earn some money. He was not an important figure. The only reason why he was summoned here was because of his prophecy illusion, that was like a fraud. Andoin's eyes were still bright, but there were dark circles around his eyes that could not be concealed. King Lang and Bolvar were about the same. They probably hadn't slept well. Andoin placed his hands on the table, and said in a low voice, "Things are developing in the worst direction." On that night, we sent out a total of 3 waves of messengers. The first wave was 3 messengers carrying the kingdom's flag and riding griffins. Then, they were struck by lightning with their griffins, and their charred corpses were found in front of Karazhan by the second wave of messengers. At this point, Andoin gritted his teeth and continued, to be on the safe side. The third wave of messengers was divided into 2 teams and followed far behind the second wave. They saw with their own eyes the second wave of messengers being turned into minced meat by magic missiles shot from the tower. At that time, the messengers shouted as they marched, and at the same time, they held up the king's token to summon the guardian. It was a special magical ring, it was impossible for Medivh not to sense the messengers. Bolvar continued, then, Medivh allowed the third wave of messengers to send people to drag back the broken bodies of the second wave of messengers. At this time, Lang, who was sitting on the throne, clenched his fingers and pressed them against his forehead. The worst-case scenario is that our guardian becomes our greatest enemy. Apart from notifying the Tirisful Council, we have no other choice. Anduin slammed his fist on the table, making a loud noise. We don't even know what happened to Medivh. If he wanted to destroy Stormwind, he could do it alone. But why did he do such a thing? Of course, Duque knew the reason. The Demon King Sardras wanted to vent his 10,000 years of resentment. For 10,000 years, he had failed to invade Azeroth many times, and even had his body destroyed by Medivh's mother, becoming a lonely ghost. Simple torture and killing could no longer appease the Demon King's anger. Sardras not only wanted to completely destroy the reputation of the Guardian Medivh and the Tirisful Council, but he also wanted the whole world to crawl under his feet in despair and fear. These 100 days were the entertainment time for Sardras to torture the people of Stormwind. To be precise, this was just the appetizer before the beginning of the destruction. Lang walked down from the throne and patted Anduin's shoulder gently to calm his anger. Duque, we asked you to come, firstly to ask if you have seen anything else. Secondly, Anduin said you are very resourceful. After all, it's impossible for the kingdom to do nothing in the face of such a threat. Is there a way to successfully prepare for the possible crisis without causing panic among the people? You know, the news that the kingdom's most dependent guardian might betray the kingdom will cause the people to fall into great panic. Duque pondered for a while, and thought to himself, Old Mai, since you're not being kind, don't blame me for pulling out the black technology that doesn't exist in this era. Then, Duque raised his head and answered loudly, we can strengthen 3 aspects: propaganda, early warning, and strengthening the army. King Lang didn't expect the young Duque to have any opinions, but he didn't expect Duque to be so confident. Go ahead. Propaganda is to inform the people that the monsters in the Elven Forest have recently mutated. A while ago, I hunted down a gnoll hog who had transformed into a giant. That guy is more than 12 feet tall. And the other gnolls are also more than 7 feet tall. This is already a great threat to the lives of the people, so Stormwind City has decided to strengthen the security around the Elven Forest. A 12-foot gnoll. Damn it, that's already a giant. Why haven't I heard of this? King Lang muttered. Your Majesty, it's actually in the report I gave you, but you don't have time to pay attention to such small-scale monster attacks, Lothar reminded. Bolvar pursed his lips. That's a good reason. We can take the opportunity to let the towns reorganize and expand the militia. After the busy farming season, there will be an hour of training every day so that the people can receive basic military training. What about weapons and equipment? Do we have to arm the farmers in advance? Lang's rhetorical question made Duque realize that no ruler wanted to see farmers with weapons, no matter what era it was. Anduin glanced at the king. We can transport some of the weapons to important towns and send trusted officers to guard them. Chapter 70. Seeing that the 3 of them had finished arguing, Duque continued, the second is warning. Towns that have the conditions have to build beacon towers on high ground. Those that don't can use signal guns. Signal gun? Anduin frowned in confusion. Duque explained to Lothar that he had come up with the idea after seeing the dwarves' firearms. The effect was a bit like fireworks. But by stuffing a sealed gunpowder pack and releasing it into the sky, a colorful signal flare could be shot tens of meters into the sky. We can agree on a specific code according to the different colors. For example, red represents the attack of monsters, and the number of blue represents the approximate number of monsters. One of the biggest problems in this era was the inconvenience of communication. Magic communication was a luxury, and most of the messages were delivered by messengers on horseback. Only the most urgent messages would be sent by griffin knights. But it was impossible to have griffins in every town, and no matter how fast they were, could they be faster than the light source of the signal flare? Lang, Andoan, and Bolvar were all people who knew about the military, and thought that it was a wonderful idea. The three of them looked at each other and saw the approval in each other's eyes. Not a bad idea, I agree. Lang decided. Then the third one, strong army. I don't know about the training of the kingdom's soldiers, but I think if the enemy is really as tall and burly as I imagined, I can help the kingdom in my own way. Andoan was slightly curious. The figures of the male Naga under me are similar to the ones I saw in my illusion. Can I let them be my sparring partners? Sparring partner? Upon hearing that, Andoan immediately realized that he had made a mistake in his military training. He had placed too much emphasis on human combat training. Regardless of what the tall monster Duque mentioned looked like, at least Andoan had seen trolls. There were indeed no trolls in the territories of Stormwind, such as the Elven Forest, the Western Wilderness, and the Red Ridge Mountains. But there were in Stranglethorn Vale further south. It was not impossible to use the tall trolls as an imaginary enemy. Even if it was a false alarm, the territory of Stormwind would expand towards Stranglethorn Vale in the future. Any other suggestions? Lang asked. I can't think of anything else for now. Lang repeatedly asked about Duque's hallucination until Duque could no longer provide any more information. Only then did the three of them let Duque leave. After Duque left, Lang suddenly asked, "What do you guys think?" Bolvar was the first to speak. If Duke Marcus is a spy, then he must be the worst one in history. The threat that Medivh poses to us is real. Even if I think about it 100 times, I still can't figure out how the method he proposed is detrimental to the kingdom. Andoan shrugged. My intuition has always been accurate. Duque will not harm us. But I feel like he's hiding something. Hide? Lang asked. Yes, he might have seen more, but for some reason, he refused to speak. Is it an accusation against Medivh? Andoan slumped on the chair, letting the cold metal gauntlet stick to his forehead. If a kid you don't know suddenly came to you and told you that your old friend of decades might betray you, would you believe it? Maybe things haven't reached that stage yet. Lang could only suppress the warning signals from his rationality and let his emotions take over for the time being. The three of them discussed for a long time, and then found the cabinet members. Finally, they unanimously approved Duque's proposal. 3 days later, in the barracks of Stormwind City, the soldiers welcomed a group of special instructors, the Naga. Standing on the high platform of the barracks, Lothar was fully armed. Beside him hung the dried corpse of a tall gnoll. His deep voice spread in all directions. Now, the kingdom is facing a new crisis. These damned monsters have mutated, multiplied, and are threatening the lives of every citizen. In the coming days, you must use your own swords to enter the forest and kill all these damned monsters. Oh. 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 At this point, the thousands of recruits below slammed their swords against their shields, and let out a majestic roar. Rookies, in order to prevent you from returning home as soon as you enter the battlefield, we have the honor of inviting Sir Duke Marcus Naga employees to teach you a lesson. As soon as Lothar finished speaking, Duque snapped his fingers, and 10 burly and majestic male Nagas, who were generally taller than the human soldiers by 2 heads, went up the stage with huge wooden hammers and swaying their thick python-like tails. Oh, aren't Nagas evil? In that case, are Nagas considered monsters that must be killed? Will we be eaten if we lose? The recruits below let out a strange cry. No, if you lose, you will only get your butts kicked by your commanding officer, Lothar replied, causing the soldiers to burst into laughter. There was no need for Lothar to make arrangements for the following matters. Soon, an officer led the Nagas to the various arenas, and then let the strongest soldiers first spar with the Nagas. On the stage, Lothar, who was sitting and watching the situation, quietly tilted his head towards Duque. By the way, don't Nagas wield tridents? At this moment, in Duque's mind, he was thinking about the scene where the Stormwind City soldiers were easily killed by the orcs in the movie before he transmigrated. That was a battle of strength on a completely different level. In front of the orcs, whose arms were thicker than the thighs of humans, the human soldiers were as weak as children. One strong man could defeat 10 men. Usually, when the orcs swung their hammers down, the human soldiers would either have their arms broken, or their heads and hands smashed into their bodies, and they would die immediately. Duque let out a breath of turbid air. I thought you wanted to use the trolls as imaginary enemies. Lothar's face stiffened. He thought that his plan to conquer the trolls' territory in Stranglethorn Vale and open up new territory for Stormwind City had been seen through by Duque. Bang! The next moment, a scream came from the arena closest to Lothar. Ah! My hand! My hand! A strong soldier fell to the ground. He had already lost his sword, and he was clutching his obviously bent arm. Next to him stood a tall male Naga. In the face of the massive number of hostile humans around him, the Naga seemed to be at a loss. Stop! Everyone stop! Anju and Lothar immediately realized that there was a problem. He jumped off the stage and dashed over. At the same time, Duque also followed. The male Naga looked aggrieved. I only used half of my strength. It's okay. Duque patted the Naga's arm lightly. Damn it. You clearly wanted to kill Ladakh. A recruit roared angrily. Chapter 71. Enough. Shut up, all of you. Anduin roared like a lion, and the entire place fell silent. He looked at the 4 extremely thick arms of the Naga, the huge body, and the big wooden mallet that was obviously used to build a house. Anduin suddenly understood a lot. Send the injured to the healing priest first. I'll go first. Lothar's reputation in the army was unparalleled. Seeing that their boss was going to test it out personally, the soldiers immediately fell silent. At this moment, Duque patted Naga's arm, and said loudly, the one in front of you is one of the strongest human warriors. Attack with all your might, or you'll be killed. Don't say I didn't remind you. Lothar did not care about Duque's words at all, and instead grabbed a standard longsword and shield that the officer next to him handed over. He weighed them in his hands before getting into a fighting stance. Come on. Naga, attack me like how you attacked that soldier just now. Before Naga attacked, Lothar had plenty of time to spare. Even when he saw the sinister smile on Duque's face, he did not care. He did not care when Naga swung his tail and pounced forward at high speed. He still did not care when Naga raised the sledgehammer high up. It was because Lothar had absolute confidence in his martial arts skills. It was a simple blow to the head, and the posture was not smooth. Even a farmer who chopped firewood every day could do it better than this Naga. Seeing this, a faint smile appeared on Lothar's face. His well-honed knight cultivation allowed him to raise his shield naturally. However, in the next moment, Lothar's smile stiffened. Fast. It's too fast. Under the tremendous force beyond human imagination, Naga's hammer let out a shrill howl. If it was really hit, not to mention Lothar, even the armor Lothar was wearing would turn from a tin can into a lump of iron. Lothar immediately understood that he definitely could not block it. In fact, no human could easily block such a blow with a shield. He was originally standing in a T-stance, and the good sense of distance made him jump back instantly. The whistling hammer brushed past the shield less than a finger's width. In the next second, he moved his sword forward, and the tip of the edgeless sword was already on Naga's throat. Naga's voice was a little bitter. I lost. No. You've done a good job. At this moment, Noxus realized that he was sweating profusely, and his inner armor was completely drenched. He was an excellent warrior and a top-notch commander. He immediately realized where the problem was. This kind of one-on-one competition had a wide space for the warriors to display their skills to their heart's content. But what about on the battlefield? In that crowded place. It was very important to maintain the formation. There were only 10 Nagas now, but if there were 100 or 1,000 Nagas swinging their hammers at the same time, it was obvious that the soldiers in the first row of the army formation would all kneel in an instant. Just imagining the scene of such a simple and violent instant kill made Noxus shudder. The soldiers around him were all cheering, but Lothar's eyes almost lost focus. In front of such a huge monster, humans seemed so weak. What to do? What should I do? What to do? Noxus was almost roaring in his heart. He really couldn't accept the fact that the soldiers he had painstakingly trained would be slaughtered like melons and vegetables in front of this monster. He suddenly saw Duque with a mysterious smile on his face. "Sir Marcus, do you have any good ideas?" Duke retorted with a question like a newbie. "You think you can't handle it? Why don't you carry it with both arms?" 2 arms. Duque's seemingly silly words opened a new window in Noxus' mind. That's right. If one arm can't carry it, why not both arms together? Come, Naga, come again. I won't fight back this time, hammer me like you did just now. Noxus raised his shield high. This time, he pressed his 2 forearms against the shield, his legs took a bow stance, and his muscles bulged. This was a completely resistant posture. The hammer, as heavy as a mountain, came crashing down as he imagined. Boom! The wooden shield made an unbearable cracking sound, but the good workmanship of Stormwind City's craftsmen prevented the shield from breaking immediately. The tremendous force was transmitted to Noxus' arms below. For a moment, Noxus felt his arms go numb, as if his arms didn't belong to him. However, even if his chest was so stuffy that he wanted to vomit blood, he still blocked it. Noxus was happy with this new suggestion. Again, hit here this time. Noxus seemed to have mastered the trick. He let Naga carry out a sweeping attack. On the other hand, it was as if he was using his body to push against the door. He turned his body sideways to face Naga and let the shield stick to his shoulder. In this way, when he received a heavy blow, his entire left arm and left shoulder would receive the force together. Bang! The fierce impact almost shattered the shield, but it still managed to block it. Noxus had obviously suffered twice, but he looked like he had gained a big advantage. When Naga stopped, Noxus turned to Duque and gave him a thumbs up. "You did a great thing for Stormwind City." Duque smiled without saying anything. It was very simple, holding the shield with both hands and using his shoulders to help share the impact. It was such a routine, but it represented the experience exchanged for countless blood. In the original history, the soldiers of Stormwind City suffered a great loss due to their lack of understanding of the orcs. They subconsciously followed the training and raised their shields with one hand, trying to block and counterattack. However, they couldn't block it, and 90% of the soldiers were killed by the orcs in one move. Even if they couldn't, they would be seriously injured and killed by the second move. After losing thousands of people, they learned this move at the cost of their lives. Now, with Duque's help, Duque believed that history would definitely be rewritten. Anduin turned around and yelled at the officers below, "Did you see the 2 postures just now? They all practice defense and counterattack like that. Don't be afraid that your blunt swords will stab the Naga. As long as you don't stab the eyes or throat, the scales of the Naga are not as fragile as you think." After giving the instructions, Noxus walked over and asked softly, "How many Nagas do you have left that you can lend me?" 100, that's the most I have. Duque answered softly. "I want all of them. Don't worry, I won't let anyone bully your Naga subordinates. Although I know you don't lack money, I'll pay you according to the standards of the instructors." "Thank you." "No. Lang and I are the ones who should be thanking you." "Actually, do you really not have anything to say to me or Lang?" "No." Duque shook his head decisively. "It's all right, I like you." Noxus gently knocked his large fist on Duque's chest. Watching Noxus leave, Duque muttered to himself, "I've done everything I can. Now, it's up to Lady Luck to lift her skirt for us." Chapter 72. There were still many things he wanted to do, but he couldn't do them. Looking at the shining stars outside the window, Duque let out a deep breath. Big changes had yet to happen, and there were only a few people with such foresight like Noxus. Most of the higher-ups in the 7 human kingdoms were still living a befuddled life. Just like how Duque wanted to build a road in the Elven Forest, from Stormwind City all the way to Reedridge Mountain. Even if he knew that the officers of this era wouldn't understand the concept of rapid deployment of troops, as long as it was convenient for the people to evacuate when the Beastmen invaded in the future. Why? The Beastmen were people who were adapted to harsh terrain. Whether it was a forest or a mountain, the Beastmen could walk as if they were flying. But the people couldn't. They had high requirements for road conditions. Evacuating with their families was often accompanied by large amounts of belongings that they couldn't bear to lose. But the road conditions in Stormwind were terrible. Apart from Stormwind City, almost all of the kingdom's territories were dirt roads that Duque found unsightly. It was fine on sunny days, but when it rained, it was all mud. Not to mention people, even carriages couldn't move. Duque wanted to build roads, but did he know what he would run into? Those short-sighted nobles thought that Duque wanted to reach out to their traditional territories from the sea, but they all rejected him. Only a few knowledgeable and open-minded nobles like Bolvar agreed to build roads in their territories, but it was only a very bumpy cobblestone road. Even with Duque's money, the progress was abnormally slow. According to estimates, 100 days would be the most they could build from Stormwind City to Goldflash Town. It would be good if there was cement. Now, he could only think about it. Regardless of the secular world, Duque had reached a bottleneck on his path as a mage. This was a very troublesome matter. No matter how the system elf helped to calculate, it couldn't figure out what Old Man Norton meant by expanding the magic circuit to the entire sky. This was Old Man Norton's original words. In the field of Earth Mage, you've already done very well. That is to use the entire Earth as your shield, absorbing pure elemental power from the Earth and storing it in your body. It forms a magic cycle and uses the magic in this cycle to communicate with the various elemental planes to cast magic. Even though your magic circuit can be successfully connected to the elemental world, and your circuit foundation is at the best level, you won't be able to advance until you understand the meaning of Sky Mage. By the way, the magic power you use to contact the elements realm has been diluted by spells. If you don't control the inflow of elements from the elements realm, your body will be burnt in a split second. After the old man said so much in one breath, Duque could finally ask, "Does that refer to the high concentration of magic power?" Norton shook his head. Yes and no. Concentrated, high-quality mana was indeed an important indicator of an earth mage becoming a sky mage. But the key is to perceive and master the feeling of turning the entire sky into your magic circuit through meditation. You're still young, you shouldn't be so anxious. Duque had no choice but to be anxious. There were still 3 months until the Door of Darkness incident. Expanding Stormwind's strength was the right thing to do, but his own strength was equally important. This didn't just involve his future status in the world, but also a series of follow-up problems. For example, who would fight Ghoul Dan in a magic battle? Who was Ghoul Dan? The Orc Warlock Ghoul Dan could be said to be the first super boss in the Door of Darkness incident, second only to Medivh. Ghoul Dan was previously the chief of the Storm Marauder clan on Draenor planet where the orcs lived. Originally, Ghoul Dan was just a shaman among the orcs, but his mastery of the shaman doctrine quickly surpassed his mentor, the shaman Zul. But the shaman's power didn't seem to be as strong as he had expected. In order to increase his own power, Ghoul Dan turned his attention to the endless darkness. He quickly discovered the Demon King Sargera's right-hand man, Kill Jaden the Deceiver. And Kill Jaden's terrifying power benefited him greatly. Ghoul Dan learned the skills of the demons, and after combining the power of the shaman with the power of the demons, he became the first warlock in the history of this world. Ghoul Dan brought this magic into the tribe, turning the orcs into war machines that thirsted for chaos and destruction. He also fed the demons' blood to the orc army, letting the orcs massacre the Draenei. Ghoul Dan's continued growth in power brought him to a higher position in the tribe. 800 years later, Medivh, who was possessed by Sardras, appeared in a dream to this orc warlock from Draenor planet. Together, the two of them opened the portal, Door of Darkness, that linked Azeroth and Draenor. It was to teleport the orcs to planet Azeroth. In the original history, Stormwind City's Royal Magic Academy lost miserably, and the entire Royal Magic Academy was almost completely wiped out. The winner was naturally the Orc Shadow Council ruled by Ghoul Dan. On the side of the Stormwind army, after Duque had done so many things, Duque believed that no matter how much Stormwind lost, it wouldn't be as bad as it was in the history before he transmigrated. But a magic battle, not easy. Duque asked the system elf for help, but he only got a reply, "It's unscientific, I can't do anything about it." How could one do something well? First, one had to set a goal, then find a way to reach the goal, and finally put in effort, constantly making corrections, constantly solving problems before reaching the goal, and finally reaching the goal. Now, Duque knew that his goal was to become the strongest mage, but he didn't know the process to reach this goal. He lacked information. And the books of Stormwind City's Royal Magic Academy couldn't meet his needs at all. Rubbing his eyebrows, Duque whispered to himself, "Looks like I still have to rob Karazhan." Yes. Karazhan. Medivh's lair. If this world's history was still within the 80%, after the Door of Darkness opened, there would be a chance to raid Karazhan. As long as he got rid of the chaotic Medivh and kicked Sardras back into the abyss, then Duque would have the chance to get Medivh's treasure. In the original history, Khadgar, the traitorous dog, after getting rid of Old Max, followed a mage organization called the Violet Eye and took away Medivh's treasure and all the precious books, sending them to the Dalajan that he was truly loyal to. The result? With the fall of the Dalajan, a large number of Medivh's magic scrolls and books were lost. Sigh, let's not think about that first. There were still 3 months left, and he couldn't waste it all. If he met a warlock who played with demonic magic, it wouldn't be good if he lost even more of his moral integrity. Duque decided to go into seclusion. Chapter 73. The earth of Draenor was rotting, and no normal plants could grow. The turbid wind blew in the sky, making it hard to breathe. Without plants, herbivores could not survive, and naturally, the carnivores at the top of the food chain could not survive either. The stars in the sky were on the verge of falling, and the sun was dim in the thick clouds of dust. Everything seemed lifeless. The wind on the earth suddenly stopped, and the air reverberated with the melodious and deep sound of a horn. The wind stopped, and the dust that was originally flying along with the wind also settled down. On the ground, huge figures could be seen advancing towards the same target. There were huge wolves of various colors, but most of them were huge green-skinned humanoid figures. They were generally more than 2 meters tall, and their entire bodies were bulging with explosive muscles. Even the slightly slender females among them had burly figures that completely surpassed the human warriors. They carried all kinds of weapons and gathered at the place where the horn sounded. Their thick and heavy feet stepped on the ground, and even the solid ground made slight cracking sounds when they stepped on it. The earth was cracking inch by inch, and there was no longer a trace of nutritious soil. Every step on it was like the sound of approaching death. A huge bolt of lightning seemed to split the sky, and the remaining cracks were imprinted on the retina of these burly warriors. A giant with a reddish complexion raised his head in shock. He saw that in the gloomy sky, the mud-like clouds were slowly flowing towards the target. "This is Durotan, there's no need to look. That must be Ghoul Dan's spell." Durotan opened his eyes, and in his pure blue pupils was a reflection of a nearly straight tornado. It was as if the energy of the entire world of Draenor was converging there. As the chief of the Orc Frostwolf clan, the young Durotan had an incomparably strong body. On that strong body that was like a small mountain, it was covered with the most typical Orc-style accessories. 2 large braids were combed well and hung down in front of his chest. On his 2 arms that were thicker than a cow's leg, there was a ring of animal tooth ornaments of various sizes. Around his waist was a white leather belt that was thick enough to cover his entire belly. Durotan was carrying a huge axe that was as big as half a door of a human house. Beside him was his beloved white wolf, which was as big as a water buffalo and weighed at least 400 kilograms. Durotan wriggled his mouth, and the two protruding fangs in his lower jaw emitted a crisp metallic sound as they were pierced by decorative iron rings. Orgrim, I feel that the destruction of the world has something to do with Ghoul Dan. Durotan's good friend, Orgrim Doomhammer, who would soon become the great chief of the orc tribe, tilted his head and said, I don't think a single orc can destroy a world. Orgrim's body wasn't as burly as Durotan's. Just by looking at his figure, he was half a size smaller. However, if any orc neglected the square-headed iron hammer in his hand, which was larger than most orcs' torsos, they would definitely pay a heavy price. Orgrim's body was also covered with all sorts of orc accessories. The fangs hanging on his body were a type of decoration, but also a symbol of his bravery. Only a orc warrior who had killed a ferocious monster by himself could cut off the monster's fangs and hang them on his body. In this aspect, Orgrim was not inferior to Durotan. Both of them were renowned warriors among the orcs. As they got closer to their destination, Durotan saw more and more orcs. These elite warriors from different clans were either beating their own chests or letting out sky-shaking roars, displaying their bravery in all kinds of ways. Some of them were even slightly exaggerated, and naturally, they were wrestling with those who were not pleasing to their eyes. The entire gathering place was like a huge arena. The Warsong tribe, Blackrock tribe, Shadow Moon tribe, Shattered Palm tribe. Almost all the large tribes are here. Orgrim continued, of course, the world is ending. If we don't want to follow the world to its end, we can only respond to Great Chief Blackhand and Ghoul Dan's call. While the two of them were talking, many beastmen noticed Durotan. Many orcs' pupils suddenly shrank, and the crowd filled with fighting spirit became restless. The gathered orc warriors parted like water splashes, or perhaps like a retreating tide. The orc warriors opened up a path for the two warriors, who were wearing tusk ornaments all over their bodies. At this time, an even taller and more burly figure appeared on a rough wooden platform not far away. It was a huge orc wrapped in heavy iron armor. The huge war hammer covered in dried blood showed off his bravery. His iron-blooded face seemed to tell the other orcs that he also had a heart of steel. His aura when he appeared was like a giant battle axe, forcibly splitting apart the wild and unruly crowd of orcs. Those who retreated a few steps too late were suffocated by the murderous aura that was filled with the smell of blood, and their chests shrank as they exhaled, almost losing the courage to bounce back. Oh, Frostwolf tribe, go look for a place in the south. In the tribe, the only one who could suppress the heroic Frostwolf chief in terms of aura was the great chief Blackhand, nicknamed the Destroyer. Durotan and Orgrim simultaneously punched their left chests with their right fists to show respect to the great chief. But Blackhand didn't even look at Durotan as he left. After settling down the Frostwolf tribe, an hour passed. In front of the huge stone gate that was a few hundred meters tall, there was a call to assemble. Woo woo, woo woo woo, the long horn sounded as if it came from a long, long time ago. It was as if it was announcing that the world that the Draenei called Draenor was about to perish. It was also as if it was blowing the horn of a new war. Most of the orcs didn't think that much. They only knew that it was Ghoul Dan gathering the orcs in the name of Great Chief Blackhand. The green orcs surged towards the wide open space in front of the huge gate. The tall and sturdy figure easily squeezed the empty space until not even a drop of water could trickle through. The weaker orcs couldn't even get close to the gate. Those who lacked strength and stamina would naturally be pushed to the outermost circle. On the stone steps in front of the huge gate that was dozens of meters tall, a hunchbacked orc in a black robe slowly walked into the sight of tens of thousands of orcs, holding a skull staff. There were even a few huge bone spikes sticking out of his back, and there were even a few dried skulls stuck on them. His figure wasn't huge, but no orc would ignore his existence. He was the one who had surpassed his mentor, Nzul, and was now the ruler of the orcs, Ghoul Dan. Chapter 74. His body had become ugly and terrifying from the corrosion of demonic energy. His claws glowed green from using demonic energy all day long. Unlike the great chief Blackhand's typical beastman bravery, his aura was cold and evil, and anyone who got close would feel suffocated. His eyes glowed with an evil red light, and his will controlled the fate of the entire beastman tribe. The staff filled with a terrifying aura stabbed into the solid floor tiles. It was a small sound, but the tens of thousands of beastmen in the plaza heard it at the same time. That was the rumbling sound of the gears of fate turning. When the world was about to be destroyed, when the land lacked food, when the beastmen were about to be destroyed, Ghoul Dan, as a shaman and beastman prophet, responded to the prayers of the beastmen. Ghoul Dan moved his mouth full of fangs, and his voice spread in all directions through the evil magic. Our world is about to be destroyed. But the great beastmen will not be destroyed. His voice carried a strange echo, as if the entire world was beating. Every word he said was powerful and powerful, revealing his absolute confidence. His words were like hammers striking metal, striking at the hearts of every beastman, causing their powerful hearts to spew out even more passionate blood, resonating with his words and boiling with his words. Oh, countless beastmen raised the weapons in their hands, and the ancient boldness caused the beastmen to let out heaven-shaking roars, responding to Ghoul Dan with a thunderous roar. Ghoul Dan turned his body and pointed at the door behind him with his empty left hand. This would become a legendary portal door in the future, and it looked like a temple door. It looked solemn and dignified, as well as a hint of mystery. As he pointed with his long and craggy finger, the large and empty stone door suddenly changed. A green energy wave that could be seen with the naked eye rippled out from the stone door. In the green light, the beastmen could vaguely see the scenery of the world on the other side. It was different from this dark red world that was about to be destroyed. There was a clear blue sky, elegant white clouds, and the green trees that the beastmen longed for. The beastmen's breathing instantly became heavy. This door to a new world is about to open. Behind the door, there are only a few weak races. Their strength is like our children. Their weak bodies are inferior to our women. Go. Conquer them. Slaughter them. Use our battle axes to be stained with the blood of our enemies. Use our bravery to fight for a new sky for our tribe. Under the influence of the evil demon's blood, most of the orcs had already become extremely warlike and crazy. After defeating the Dreenii in battle, the orcs' confidence reached its peak. Oh, 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 the deafening shouts and the shockwaves were enough to overturn the entire sky. Following Ghoul Dan's finger's direction, the tribal warriors who had long been selected raised the weapons in their hands, and with steps that made even the earth tremble, they turned into a green flood, surging towards the enormous door of darkness. Seeing this, Duroden turned to his old friend Orgrim and said, I suddenly remembered our war with the Dreenii. So what? The Dreenii's Shotrath city is already the Horde's territory. A useless territory. Duroden curled his lips. I hope this is a good place for the orcs to reproduce. Duroden's words were continued by his wife, Draka, who had been standing at the side. I hope we can build a better territory for our children. Duroden frowned slightly. Draka, you still insist on joining the first wave of attack? Only the bravest orcs can join the first wave of attack. Are you doubting my bravery? Draka was a little annoyed as she waved her dagger a few times. All right. At least, let me go first. Following the flood of orcs, Duroden took the lead and charged through the huge green door without hesitation. At the same time, Stormwind City. Duque, who was in the sealed room, suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes shot out a sharp light. His hands were trembling from excitement and unease, and his heart was beating violently from excitement and fear. His emotions were so complicated that he could not even describe his feelings with a single taste. As a former university student, he had never tasted the taste of war after a long period of peace. But as a transmigrator who was determined to make a name for himself in the world of Azeroth, when he saw the system elf's prompt, "The dark portal is open," he knew that his opportunity and danger had arrived at the same time. Windsor. Makarov. For the first time in 3 months, Duque's voice could be heard from outside the door. The two of them, who had been eating and drinking in the outer hall for the past few days, were instantly energized. After knocking on the door and entering the room, they saw Duque with messy hair and a long beard. His appearance was dispirited, but his eyes were unusually bright. Ever since he became Duque's follower, Windsor had more than once wondered if Duque was a terrifying, ambitious person. He looked left and right, and felt that it was a pair of eyes that thirsted to prove themselves and achieve something. Windsor could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Duque's clear and firm voice rang in their ears. "The calamity that I have been worried about is here." Their hearts skipped a beat. Duque raised his head. "This is not the end of the world, nor is it the end of mankind. There is still a lot to be done. I will prove to you, to all of Stormwind, and even to all mankind, that my preparations over the past year have not been in vain." As Duque's left and right arms, Duque had not hidden what he had done in the past period of time from them. For a moment, they all thought that Duque was going to start a rebellion and occupy Stormwind City. Duque's actions were very one-sided, not the actions of a rebel at all. And today, everything would be revealed. In Stormwind City, Lothar was still supervising the training of the soldiers in the barracks. Lothar was quite satisfied with the progress of the soldiers. With the help of the male Naga, the recruits grew at a high speed. At first, they couldn't even hold their swords steadily, but now they could attack and defend. In these 3 months, many small tactics had been developed. For example, they would let 2 soldiers hold shields in front, while the spearmen would launch sneak attacks from behind. Today seemed to be no different from any other day in the past. However, in the middle of the night, Lothar's office was knocked on by his valet. "Commander, you'd better look at this." The valet was holding a communication bucket sealed with wax. Looking at the lion mark on it, Anduin's pupils suddenly constricted. Chapter 75. 10 minutes later, in the palace. King Lang, who had already gone to bed, was having a sweet dream when he was woken up by a hurried knock on the door. "Your Majesty, it's an emergency." Even though Lang was half awake, he could recognize that it was his good friend of decades, Anduin Lothar's voice. "What the hell? Anduin, what time is it now? I hope your emergency is as serious as you say." The queen, who was also woken up from her sleep, did not say a word, and quickly dressed her husband. A few minutes later, when the guards opened the door of the bedroom for Lang, Lang saw a nervous, fully armed Anduin. "Your Majesty, traces of a foreign invasion have been found in the southeast of the kingdom. But before confirming my news, I strongly suggest that you take a look at the hourglass that Medivh gave you that day." Although it was early spring, the air was still cold. Lang only took a breath of the night air, and he felt that his lungs were about to freeze. Thump thump thump. Hurried footsteps sounded in the storm fortress. Under the escort of 2 teams of royal guards, Lang and Anduin came to a storage room that was strictly guarded by 4 guards. "Open it." Lang's voice was trembling. The guards opened it, and quickly opened the empty storage room, and lit up the oil lamps around it. Under the illumination of dozens of torches and oil lamps, Lang and Anduin's gaze suddenly froze. All the sand in the black hourglass had fallen down. "When did this happen?" Lang was asking, but his voice had unknowingly become stern. "Didn't I order for it to be checked every day?" The head of the guards in charge was sweating profusely. "Yes, it was checked. I personally confirmed that there was still a finger-sized amount of sand in the morning. Your Majesty, your order was to check every day, and inform you immediately when the sand in the hourglass is emptied." King Lang's face was ashen, and he only said a few words: "Summon the cabinet immediately." Half an hour later, the storm fortress was brightly lit. On a huge map, Anduin pointed to the southeast of Stormwind. The first to discover that something was wrong was the outpost at the south of the Red Ridge Mountains. The outpost lost contact with the outpost after 3 red signal flares, signifying the invasion of a large number of monsters. 2 months ago, the Griffin reconnaissance team that I had stationed at Lakeside Town in Red Ridge Mountain immediately took off and saw a large number of green-skinned giant humanoid monsters surging out of the Swamp of Sorrows. Gigantic? How big is it? King Lang frowned. According to the magic message, they are about 7 feet tall, and they are generally more muscular than our people. Moreover, they have all kinds of armors and heavy weapons such as axes and hammers. Duke Bolvar asked, "Are you sure it's not a troll?" Anduin shook his head. No, in order to confirm, 2 of the Griffin Knights even swooped down to observe at close range. One of the Griffin Knights was even killed by long-range weapons. The corner of King Lang's eye twitched. The griffin, a giant bird of prey with the limbs of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle, was not easy to raise. Despite the griffin's large size, it could easily overturn a large group of human soldiers in battle. If a griffin were to eat to its heart's content, it could eat a cow every day. It would be a lie to say that Lang did not feel the pinch after losing a griffin just for reconnaissance. At this time, a messenger came in. "Your Majesty, Commander, sirs, there's new news." Seeing the latest news, the whole room was dead silent. A small garrison stationed at the triangular junction of the Red Ridge Mountain had been annihilated. The garrison stationed at the Stormwind Mountain had fewer people, about 500 or so. Even so, the report said that there were no survivors. This was not a surprise attack when they were unprepared. This was a complete annihilation after they had received the warning from the outpost ahead and were prepared for battle. The weight behind this was definitely heavy. The faces of Lang and Anduin had slight spasms of pain, because this meant that their good friend of many years, Mediv, had really betrayed them. At least he had given up his duty as a guardian. Lang twisted his neck that was like a rusty machine and looked at Anduin. "Have you informed the Tirisful Council?" "Yes, but there was no response," an old court mage answered. Lang suddenly had an ominous premonition. However, the imminent large-scale invasion made Lang have no time to care about other things. Among the 7 human kingdoms, Stormwind was considered a strong country, but no matter what, Stormwind could not afford to raise a standing army of more than 100,000 people. For Stormwind, which had a total force of less than 30,000 people, the annihilation of a garrison was not a trivial matter. Most importantly, this seemed to be just the beginning. King Lang pressed his hands on the table and said in a low voice, "Information, I need more information. What the hell is our enemy? What is the evaluation of combat power? Level of armed strength? Number? What is their goal? We can't easily fight a group of enemies that we know nothing about." Lothar raised a finger. "I suggest that Duke Marcus come to the meeting. He seems to have made more preparations for this." Lothar's suggestion was firmly opposed by several other upper-class nobles. "Sir Lothar, this is a war. This is not a war game that a 15-year-old child should be allowed to participate in." Several high-ranking upper-class nobles objected, and Lang had no choice but to shake his head slightly at Lothar. The king changed the topic. "Anduin, I need your people to organize a hunt and try to catch the other party's captives. If that doesn't work, corpses will do too." "As you command, your majesty. However, I suggest that you declare the kingdom to be in a state of war before that." "State of war? No. We don't even know who the enemy is, and we're declaring the entire kingdom to be in a state of war because of an armed conflict that occurred at the farthest border of the kingdom? What a joke!" Marquis Cameron exclaimed. Entering a state of war so easily would definitely be a great damage to the interests of the nobles. It was because a state of war meant that the king could easily order the nobles to pay war taxes, transfer the nobles' private troops, and even temporarily govern the nobles' territories. That was even worse than killing them. The attitude of Marquis Cameron and the others almost made Anduin Lothar choke to death. Unfortunately, before more evidence could be produced to prove the seriousness of the situation, both Anjuan and King Lang could only temporarily treat this invasion as a border conflict. However, the speed at which the situation deteriorated was faster than everyone had expected. Except for one person, Duque. Chapter 76. Duque had asked himself countless times why Stormwind City could not defend even with the elite soldiers taught by Lothar. Was it because Lothar was forced to attack Karazhan at a critical time? Or was there another reason? After traveling to the world of Azeroth for so long, Duque finally understood something. Because the 7 human kingdoms all implemented the incomparably stupid aristocratic enfeoffment system, some things were destined to be irreversible. Unlike any centralized country, the backward enfeoffment system had its inevitability. In this era where transportation was incomparably bad, it was practically impossible to gather troops in one place and have food and supplies from all directions. Just transporting the food over, the terrible soil and wet weather were enough to waste half of the food. In order to avoid excessive food loss, countries often arranged troops in various regions for the various nobles to provide for themselves. The king only had the right to order a certain noble when and where, according to their rank, how many troops they had to send, what equipment they had to use, where to go, and where to attack. However, the king could not order the knights under a certain noble to do anything. This was the so-called vassals of the king's vassals, not the king's vassals. While the king had the right to order the nobles to do something, the nobles could also use their own troops to influence the king's decisions. The orcs had invaded, and like a plague, they spread across the entire eastern kingdoms of the world of Azeroth. From the beginning, when some of the nobles insisted that this was making a mountain out of a molehill and requested more information, the situation was like an express train heading straight to hell, falling straight down. 3 days later, the only thing the higher-ups of Stormwind knew about the orcs was that they had brought back an extremely majestic corpse in a griffin. Other than that, what did the orcs know? How strong were they? How many people did they have? Where were their targets? Stormwind knew nothing about this. However, the group of stupid nobles still forced the front lines to send back more accurate information, and refused to send troops, money, and manpower for an illusory invasion, refusing the entire kingdom to enter a state of war. The endless wrangling with the nobles in Stormwind's stronghold made Lang and Andad tired both physically and mentally. When all the blockhouses near the triangular junction between the Elven Forest and the Red Ridge Mountain were captured by the orcs, the nobles panicked. Not only did this mean that Stormwind had lost its connection and control over its eastern territory, the Red Ridge Mountains, but it also meant that once the orcs broke through the Red Ridge Mountains, they would be able to enter the richest region of Stormwind, the Elven Forest. Compared to the precipitous terrain of the Red Ridge Mountains, the Elven Forest that was situated on the plains was truly without any danger to defend. In the tens of thousands of square kilometers of Elven Forest, there were more than 100 human settlements. If the orcs wanted to, they could completely ignore the defenses of the human towns and cities. They could first divide and surround the towns and cities, then annihilate them one by one. These settlements were the fiefdoms of the nobles in Stormwind, and where their core interests lay. We must not let those damned beasts invade the kingdom. Yes. In order to protect our homeland, we will fight to the last man. For Stormwind, for Azeroth. Fight. The nobles who had been slow to react suddenly came to a consensus within an hour. They unanimously requested King Lang to organize a battle at the mountain pass of the Elven Forest into the Red Ridge Mountains, and use the dangerous mountain gorge to stop the orcs from further invading. After finally sending the nobles away, Lang slumped on the throne and asked Anduin in a weak voice. In this empty and huge inner court, there was only him and Lothar, the king and the minister. What do you think of this battle? Your Majesty, I am not optimistic. According to the intelligence, those huge green beasts are very good at fighting in the mountains. I do not think that they can be stopped by just relying on the terrain. Then what should we do? Let them invade the Elven Forest and destroy the essence of the whole kingdom? Hell, if Medivh is here. God! Why do I always forget that he is the culprit of this incident? Lang covered his face in pain. Actually, I think we should ask for Duque's opinion. After all, the response from the front line is that the performance of the troops trained by the Naga is obviously better than the other troops, Lothar suggested in a low voice. He may have some smarts, but he is too young and his status is too low. Besides, the great nobles will not tolerate a little kid telling them what to do. Sigh. As the preparation for the war began, Andoin felt that Duque was more and more good. Before the troops arrived, the food and fodder arrived first. In order to mobilize the food needed by the army, Lang had to order the food of Stormwind City to be transferred to the front line near the Riedridge Mountains. However, the spring rain in March made the transportation of food extremely difficult. The transportation from Stormwind City to Gold's Higher Town was extremely smooth because of Duque's road construction. However, the road from Gold's Higher Town to the east of the Riedridge Mountains was so terrible that it made Lothar curse. The muddy dirt road almost paralyzed the entire transportation plan. A large amount of food, armaments, and various supplies were piled up in Gold's Higher Town and could not be transported out. Why is the road from Stormwind City to Gold's Higher Town so good? But the rest is so terrible. Due to the needs of the war, the Lion's Pride Inn in Gold's Higher Town had become Lothar's temporary command post. Lothar, who was looking at the map, slammed the table and cursed. At this time, a sergeant said in a low voice, originally, Sir Marcus was willing to fund the construction of the road from Stormwind City to the Riedridge Mountains and replace all the mud roads with cobblestone roads. However, among the nobles, only Duke Bolvar Fordragon agreed. In the end, only the section from Stormwind City to Gold's Higher Town was built. King Lang and Andoin were speechless at the same time, but there was a vague feeling in their hearts. Did that kid Duque even predict this? Impossible. On the 1st of April, which was later known as the first year of the Dark Portal. Despite the harsh conditions, Stormwind gathered 10,000 soldiers and nearly 6,000 private soldiers of the nobles to form a coalition army and set them up at the entrance of the Riedridge Mountains. Looking down from the enormous Riedridge Mountain, there was not a single tree on the barren Scarlet Mountain, and then a sea of green forest in the distance, stretching as far as the eye could see. It was like a distant painting that could be expanded without limit, making everything seem very small in front of it. The Riedridge Mountains were very large, but unfortunately, the V-shaped twin peaks in the westernmost part of the Riedridge Mountains were like a lonely island in the endless sea in front of the vast elven forest. It seemed so lonely and helpless. Chapter 77. Anjou and Lothar stood on the peak of this isolated island. Looking at the newly built bunkers on both sides of the mountain path, Andoin was uncertain. He did not know how useful this temporarily built line of defense would be. We've prepared a month's worth of rations, more than 150,000 arrows, and 1,000 spare sets of armor. The logistics officer reported to Anjouin. But Anjouin was restless because of this. There was nothing he could do about the lack of logistics. He could only hope that the weather would improve. If we can drag it out until midsummer, the road should be much easier. However, the scene on the 3rd of April left the entire upper echelons of Stormwind speechless. The nobles had also sent many people to participate in this battle. Some were brave men like Bolvar Fordragon, some were sent to the front lines by their families, and some were seeking political capital. In any case, on the two nameless peaks of the Riedridge Mountains, there were 2 dukes, 4 marquises, and 11 earls of Stormwind. The number of lower and middle nobles was uncountable. In front of these Stormwind nobles, who had lived in peace for nearly 1,000 years, was a terrifying and barbaric army. At first, the battle cries sounded like distant playfulness in the morning fog. But the moment that green line appeared on the opposite peak, a deafening sound wave and violent drumming came crashing down like a huge wave. The sound wave was so loud that it felt like someone was chopping at the eardrums of every noble present with an axe. The green flood easily dyed the entire opposite peak. It was countless green giants. They were burly and waved a mess of primitive weapons, but their terrifying numbers easily exceeded the limits of the nobles' psychological endurance. Were there 10,000 people here? Or was it 100,000? The green tide dyed several peaks on the opposite side, and the unfolding battle line easily exceeded the entire vision of the nobles. Not to mention 3 or 4 peaks, it felt like even if the battle line was stretched 10 times longer, it would not be able to accommodate the simultaneous attack of so many orcs. They pushed and collided with each other, and even punched their compatriots who tried to stop them. But their numbers were so great that it was enough to make anyone with trypophobia go crazy. The green torrent was so crazy that it seemed like it would swallow everything in its path with its raging momentum. Lothar gritted his teeth, as if he wanted to record every orc flag with his eyes. Unfortunately, he could only copy the 3rd flag that looked like scribbles and could only give up. There were too many flags, and it was too messy. Even if the orcs were holding the same clan's flag, due to the poor craftsmanship, it looked like there were several clans' flags. Only the smart orcs could clearly tell which clan was which. There was a huge canyon between the V-shaped twin peaks and the opposite mountain. After repeated calculations, Lothar found that it was just within the range of human bows and arrows. Lothar was confident that he could turn that place into a death trap for his enemies. Now, Lothar's expression changed. The soldiers in the bunkers on the hillside had indeed shot out a large number of arrows, and the overwhelming arrows had indeed hit the orc vanguard. But the number of orcs that fell could be counted on one hand. Did the arrow miss? No. He hit the target. The bullet had hit the target without a doubt. But what did Lothar and the nobles see through the telescope? A bunch of crazy orcs. They saw with their own eyes that an orc had at least 20 arrows in his chest, shoulder, and face. However, the green-skinned orc swung his arm in front of him as if he was shooing away a fly, forcibly sweeping away all the arrows or pulling them out and throwing them on the ground. His right eye was already blind, his flesh had been flipped open, and the arrowheads had hooked out large chunks of flesh, leaving more than 10 huge bloody holes the size of a wrist on his entire upper body. But the orc still charged forward crazily. He roared and rushed to a bunker, using his huge hammer that was several times bigger than a human head to smash the outer wall of the bunker made of bricks and stones. He dragged a wailing soldier out of the bunker and tore the soldier in half at the waist in front of the remaining defenders of the bunker. The soldier did not die on the spot. Amidst the orc's crazy laughter, the upper body that had lost its lower body crawled on the ground for a few meters before dying. This scene made Lothar and the nobles tremble. All the fortifications, like sandcastles on the beach, were all washed away by a huge green wave. Release the arrows. The orcs fought head-on. Falling rocks, Lothar saw with his own eyes that a rock the size of a millstone fell, about to smash an orc who was rushing up the mountain into meat paste. Do you know what happened? The orc used his arm that was thicker than a cow's leg to swing his fist and smash the big rock. The storm warrior who threw the stone was stunned. In that split second, the beast man had already crawled in front of the storm warrior. A huge and thick arm stretched out and grabbed the storm warrior's hair and head. The storm warrior's entire body was pulled out of the wall and thrown down the mountain. The orc who was laughing halfway up the mountain chopped the soldier in half with his axe the moment he passed by. This caused the orc to laugh even louder. The orcs were a bunch of bloodthirsty and warlike lunatics. Anduin Lothar's face turned green. He knew that anyone could see that the Stormwind army had to retreat. The battle was irreversible. Order the entire army to retreat. The order to retreat was not wrong. Any rational commander would know that there was no way they could fight in this situation. But how they would retreat was also a problem. If everyone scattered, the retreat would turn into a rout. Under the relentless pursuit of the energetic orc army, it would easily turn into a rout. In the end, there would only be less than 10% of the soldiers who would be able to return to Stormwind City. All the nobles fixed their burning gazes on Lothar's handsome but pained face. Lothar gritted his teeth and said, "The Griffin Legion will cover our retreat." On a blue flag with golden edges, a golden griffin held a sword in each of its hind claws. This was the Griffin Legion. Stormwind's first legion in the eastern part of the Elven Forest. Its history could be traced back to the descendants of Thoradin the Great. Stormwind's founding emperor had led his people south to the rich Elven Forest. It had participated in the First Stormwind War. At that time, the Elven Forest had not been as peaceful as it was today. At that time, there had been many trolls in the forest. It was the Griffin Legion's bravery that had driven the trolls south, past the Twilight Forest, and into the miasma-filled Stranglethorn Vale. This was a legion that had inherited the iron will of the founding emperor. But today, at this time and place, Lothar was going to bury them in this hopeless battle to cover their retreat. It wasn't because he wanted to preserve the damned private soldiers of the nobles, but because of the entire army. Only the Griffin Legion could complete the task of covering their retreat. Any general who knew how to use troops knew that no matter how badly an army was beaten, as long as a tenth of the old soldiers were left, the spirit of the army would be passed down, and their reputation would continue. But after seeing this scene, Lothar knew that the Griffin Legion would disappear forever. Its reputation and the history it was so proud of would all disappear in this dull red valley. Under the siege of tens of thousands of orcs, the human infantry, who were weaker in terms of stamina, speed, and agility, could not escape the pursuit of the orcs. Chapter 78. Above the mountain peak that represented the horizon in the distance was a dark gray sky. Under the thick dark clouds that almost covered the entire mountain peak, countless green orcs were crossing the mountain peak and killing their way out. The entire canyon was filled with the scattered limbs of the human soldiers, as well as weapons and armor that glowed with a matte luster. From the initial defensive battle, it had already turned into a scene of an apocalyptic massacre. Apart from the heavy-duty crossbows and a small team of mages that could cause relatively effective damage to the orcs, the human camp could not do anything to the orcs at all. The orcs smashed the pillboxes one by one like whack-a-mole, pulled out the human soldiers inside, and killed them one by one. The entire canyon echoed with the orcs' rude and arrogant laughter. Anduin Lothar, who was in the command post at the top of the mountain, turned pale. He turned to the commander of the Griffin Legion, and said in a deep voice, "General Tom Seamus, bring your men and follow me. Stormwind needs a legion to cover the rear." After saying that, Lothar's tall body seemed even taller. Every noble present lowered their heads in shame. They were the ones who forced King Lang to fight a messy battle without knowing who the enemy was. They were the ones who let Anduin and the entire Griffin Legion die in order to protect their own territory. The command post was clearly bustling with people, but all the nobles suddenly felt a sense of desolation. They felt like they had given up on a comrade. General Tom Seamus was a middle-aged man in his 30s with blonde hair and a square face. He was a typical soldier who did not seem like a noble at all. His coarse eyebrows rose along with the bulging muscles on his cheeks. General Seamus stood at attention and smiled as he gently put on his helmet. Before putting on his helmet, he did not forget to tidy up the red tassel on his helmet, which was different from that of ordinary soldiers. It seemed that he was afraid that the orcs would not be able to tell that he was a general. "If I were to go with Sir Lothar, I'm sure I wouldn't be lonely," he said calmly, but there was a sense of firmness in his voice that was almost beyond the scope of his voice. Willing to be a hero for a second. Or a coward for life. Only when a man truly understood these words would he understand where the heaviness of the sword in his hand came from. Lothar turned to Bolvar for Dragon and nodded. "If I can't go back, tell Lang that his good friend, Anduin Lothar, fought for his kingdom to the last drop of his blood." Bolvar's facial muscles twitched. He suddenly took a step forward, wanting to draw his sword from its scabbard. "I'll accompany you." All of a sudden, Anduin's hand pressed down on Bolvar's wrist, preventing him from drawing his sword. "The war has only just begun. The death of a mere knight is enough. I'll leave the retreat to you, Duke for Dragon." Anduin's voice was so loud that no one could tell that he was ready to die. Bolvar's mouth squirmed for a long time, but he could not utter a single word. In the end, he resolutely turned his head away, and his face was filled with unconcealable pain. "Listen up, I, Bolvar for Dragon, will be in charge of the retreat. Whoever wants to be the first to escape will have their heads cut off. Lothar had even considered this. Without the support of King Lang, Anduin was just a mere knight. But without Lang, Bolvar was still the high and mighty duke. His family background and identity were a deterrent to the nobles who no longer had much fighting spirit. Soon, all the nobles in the command room filed out. The yells of the noble officers could be heard from the back of the mountain. Apart from the soldiers in the small fortress, more than 70% of the soldiers on the mountain began to retreat in an orderly manner. Looking at the green tide in the distance, Lothar's eyes were filled with indescribable complexity. Was it loneliness? Was it sorrow? Was it indignation? Or was it courting death? Tom Seamus returned and stood by Lothar's side. His voice was firm and powerful. The 5,000 soldiers of the Griffin Legion are ready. To be honest, Lothar did not need to bring up the rear himself. As the commander of this battle, he could totally push the responsibility to the nobles who had been arrogant before the start of the battle, only to tremble in fear at the sight of the orcs. Lang would definitely protect him. But Lothar did not. He calmly put on his helmet and led Tom Seamus out of the command post. "Guards, blow our horn and tell those barbaric bastards that we are coming." Lothar's loud and clear voice made the guards at the door feel deep veneration. Woo woo woo. The heavy sound of the horn rang out, causing the orcs who were immersed in killing to raise their green-skinned heads involuntarily. Halfway up the mountain, a few of the largest fortresses on the two peaks that had not yet been attacked by the orcs opened up. Thousands of human soldiers in bright silver armor were like rivers flowing into the sea. They quickly gathered into two square formations, each guarding one of the peaks. On the 30-degree slope, they slowly advanced down the mountain. Roar, finally some decent fellows have come to die. A chief of a small tribe laughed in the orc language. The warriors of the Griffin Legion slowly moved down the smoothest side of the mountain. As far as the eye could see, large floating shields and armor formed a stream of steel. The entire army looked like a dazzling ball of flowing mercury. In the gaps between the kite shields that were a size larger than the average Stormwind soldier, one could vaguely see that these heavily armored infantrymen only had half of their faces exposed in front of their helmets. Their eyes were filled with determination. At the very front were all shield swordsmen. From the third row onwards, there were spearmen holding spears that were almost 4 meters long. They rested their spears on the shoulders of the crouching comrades in the front row, which just happened to extend through the gaps between the shields. The fourth and fifth rows of spearmen did the same. However, the angle of the spears in each row was higher. This had been calculated. For the tall orcs, the lowest row of spears just reached their waists. The entire square formation was like an enormous steel porcupine, intimidating to look at. It was as if a forest of spears had risen up, the densely packed spear tips glinting with cold light. If they were up against humans, this would probably be a battle of attrition. Simple bows and arrows were almost useless against this line of defense. But the orcs were different. They laughed sinisterly and roared, waving their extremely heavy weapons as they attacked fearlessly. Giant battle axes swept across, and all that could be heard was the sound of spear shafts snapping. The spear shafts of the spearmen were all specially chosen. Normally, when humans used heavy swords to hack at the same spot, they would have to hack at least a few times before it would break. But in the face of the orcs' immense strength, breaking spears was as easy as breaking chopsticks. Chapter 79. The orcs at the very front naturally paid the price with their lives. But they used their bodies and lives to destroy more than 30% of the spears. Many of the second wave of orcs that charged to the front could already fight with the sword and shield soldiers at the very front. Bam! Even though the soldiers of the Griffin Legion had all been trained by the Naga instructors, the orcs' heavy hammers still caused many of them to split open in actual combat. The soldiers who had undergone strict training took advantage of the orcs' exhaustion to quickly stab out with their long swords. They succeeded, but also failed. They had indeed killed the second wave of orcs, but the third wave had taken advantage of the situation to close in. Some of the berserk orcs threw out their heavy hammers that weighed more than 50 kilograms, while others even crashed into the human formation. The heavy blows that were comparable to the charge of a rhinoceros often required 3 or more warriors to stack up their shields to withstand it. Many depressions appeared in front of the orderly human formation. Once they were locked in combat, the difference in individual combat ability was immediately apparent. Even against an elite force like the Griffin Legion, the orc warriors could still fight with a loss ratio of 1 to 3. This was all thanks to the orcs' terrible armor. These green-skinned orcs usually had less than 30% of their bodies covered in armor, and it was leather armor that was easier to pierce. Once the heart or any other vital point was pierced, the orcs would also be finished. It was just that the orcs' tenacious vitality allowed them to fight for a period of time after receiving a fatal injury before collapsing to the ground and dying. Anduin Lothar waved his heavy sword and fought at the very front. He was perhaps the most eye-catching existence in the human camp. He used a two-handed sword like it was a one-handed sword. His solid but unflashy swordsmanship allowed him to finish off his enemies in the simplest and fastest way. There were already more than 20 orc corpses lying in front of him. The commander should have been at the center of the army. But now that this kind of tactic had lost its meaning, and required courage, he came to the front lines. A solid pillar of support could give the soldiers more confidence. On a nearby mountain, General Seamus made the same choice as Lothar. It was a pity that the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Whether it was in terms of military strength or individual combat power. Every time Lothar cut down the orcs at the front, the ones at the back who were already impatient would immediately fill in the gaps, roaring as they launched crude yet powerful attacks. Less than half an hour into the battle, Lothar believed that he had caused no less than 1,000 casualties to the orcs. However, this number of casualties was simply a drop in the ocean compared to the orcs that were everywhere. Lothar could still fight. He waved his sword and stabbed, hacked, and slashed the ferocious-looking orcs to death. However, he could clearly feel the number of soldiers around him decreasing rapidly. The originally thick phalanx had become thin, and Noxus did not even need to look back to see that it had become deep behind him. There were 3 horizontal formations arranged along the mountainside. Behind the formation were a large number of injured people who were unable to move or had difficulty moving. To make matters worse, there were many orcs that he had never seen before. These orcs were slightly smaller than their brethren. They wore loose robes and carried staves. After a few seconds of crazy chanting, a Griffin Legion soldier would go berserk. Some would rush out of the formation and attack the orcs, only to be engulfed quickly. Or worse, they would slash their swords at their comrades who had been fighting alongside them. Anduin knew that the collapse of the battle line would happen in the next 2 to 3 minutes. "Commander, Duke Fordragon has ordered you to retreat." The voice of the messenger suddenly sounded behind Lothar. "Retreat? How do you expect me to retreat?" Looking at the orcs who were still moving quickly over the mountains, Lothar knew that if he did not stop the orcs' attack, what awaited them would be a faster and more severe defeat. Lothar tilted his head and saw that General Seamus' troops on the mountain peak next to him had not been defeated either. However, their losses were a little worse than his. There were only 2 horizontal lines left. Lothar did not know that at this moment, more than a dozen nobles dressed as private soldiers had crept up the empty mountain peak. They nimbly dismounted from their horses and unloaded all the things that were on the horses. While they were doing this, a warrior wearing the standard Stormwind armor with the insignia erased almost couldn't help but draw his sword and rush down to help. However, he was stopped. "Can you help by going down alone?" Reggie. The one who was called Reggie was naturally Reginald Windsor, the future marshal. Windsor gritted his teeth. "Am I not going to do anything?" Duque smiled and raised 3 fingers. Every time he finished a paragraph, he would curl one finger. "First of all, don't forget that you're already my follower. Second, that's why I'm here. Third, I don't know how to split myself. I can at most destroy the opponent's flames, but I can't cover 2 troops at the same time. I want you and Makarov to cover General Tom Seamus on the mountain. Such a person shouldn't die in this place. Okay. Windsor waved his hand, and more people dressed as private soldiers crept up the previously empty mountaintop fortress. Looking at the situation at the foot of the mountain, Duque suddenly sighed. Heaven to the left, the warriors to the right. Why do I feel so heavy when I personally experience this? Lothar and the warriors of Griffin Legion were all great. It was this great glory that made Duque unable to bear to see the entire Griffin Legion fall here. General Seamus was already an arrow at the end of its flight. His left arm hung low. The fierce attacks from the orc warriors had dislocated his entire left arm. Even the slightest movement would cause him heart-wrenching pain. His right leg had been pierced by a rough spear. Even though it didn't hurt his bones, blood was flowing out. He was very tired, and he didn't even want to move a finger. He was very dirty, and his golden hair was covered in dark red mud. It wasn't mud, it was dried flesh, some orc, and some of his comrades. His guards blocked a hammer for him, and he saw with his own eyes the ribs of the lad who was hammered in the back. From the moment he received Lothar's order until now, he had always thought that he would die here. Suddenly, he heard a strange whistling sound. It was similar to the sound of a rain of arrows, and it was even more frightening than the sound of 10 archer companies firing in unison. Before he could turn his head, there was a sudden deafening pft pft pft, and the green in front of him was swept away. The green tide that he had thought would never stop was forcibly torn apart. Who did this? General Tom Seamus suddenly turned his head. He saw something he had never seen before. At least 100 palms of arcane energy floated in the air. Chapter 80. Hand of Magic, a level 0 spell that was drawn as a cantrip. Even a magic apprentice could easily cast it. But what about 100 hands of magic? For a moment, General Tom Seamus almost thought that all the royal mages of Stormwind City had arrived. Seamus didn't dare to expect the royal family's mage team to appear here since they were the treasures of the king and the nobles. There was a saying in the upper echelons of the military that unless the enemy attacked Stormwind City, they wouldn't be able to see all the royal mages. Mages were mysterious, powerful, and noble. Their food and accommodation had to be the best. Even if the whole army was eating grass, the pharaoh had to eat white bread. And they couldn't tolerate any noise when they were resting. The scarcity of mages led to mages rarely going to the battlefield. The team of mages on the battlefield today was put together by Duke Bolvar Fordragon and several nobles. When they decided to retreat, they retreated as soon as possible. Why were there mages on the battlefield? And they looked like they were on the same side. Wiping his blood-stained eyes, Seamus suddenly found that the things stuck in the orcs were very strange. They were all forged diamond-shaped awls. They were obviously larger than the arrowheads of bows, but they weren't as big as daggers. However, it was these awls that made hundreds of orcs cover their eyes and roll on the ground in pain. And twice that number of orcs were sent flying down the hill, seemingly dead. Was this also magic? The next moment, a striking black shadow floated down from the top of the hill. He was wearing a weird black robe, and his entire face was hidden in the hood, making it impossible to see his face. The hands of magic around him, which were made of arcane energy, launched arcane missiles ferociously as he descended. No, it couldn't be called arcane missiles anymore. It was a barrage. Denser than a rainstorm and more violent than a rain of arrows, those were arcane missiles that only official mages could launch. As an experienced general, Seamus could tell at a glance that it was definitely not something that a novice earth mage of the royal mages could release. Every purple-blue arcane missile was not only fast, but also powerful. Even an orc skull would be blown off by a single arcane missile that hit the face of a beastman, whose swords might get stuck if they tried to slash at it. More terrifyingly, those arcane missiles were launched from the descending hand of magic, shooting while moving. But he did not panic at all. What kind of spell control was this? And it wasn't one hand of magic, but more than 100? Even Zimos's eyes were worth it. For a moment, he almost thought that the damn, mysterious guardian Medivh had returned to His Majesty Lang's side to fight for the entire Azeroth. He was absolutely sure that it was not Medivh. Medivh never hid his head but showed his tail, and Medivh rarely used such low-level spells. Even though Medivh rarely cast spells, Lin Li's impression of him was that Medivh also liked to bombard things. Then, who was he? General Seamus's curiosity almost burst his chest. At this moment, an old voice came from the black-robed mage's hood. General Seamus, take your men and retreat. Leave this to me. On the battlefield, soldiers only accepted military orders. General Seamus almost instinctively wanted to reject him, but he shuddered. He saw his subordinates. Although their faces were still filled with determination, their eyes were filled with exhaustion and sorrow that could not be concealed. Most of their comrades were already in eternal rest here. If necessary, they were absolutely willing to accompany their fallen comrades in eternal rest. But was there a need for that? General Seamus knew very well that these were the last seeds of the Griffin Legion. If they were all killed, the Griffin Legion would forever disappear from the battlefield in Stormwind. Gritting his teeth, General Seamus roared, "Sir Mage, thank you for your help, but the last order the Griffin Legion received was to defend this place to the death." Under the black robe, Duque was stunned. He did not think that Seamus would be so stubborn. No, it should be said that he was so stubborn. How was he going to convince this guy? Duque was also anxious. He lightly tapped the left side of his chest, and a mage's badge flashed. His Majesty Rin has orders. You have already completed the task of stopping the enemy. Now retreat immediately. After you go down the mountain, there will be backup to cover you. General Seamus's body trembled. He had been in the army for many years. How could he not tell that the black-robed man in front of him was actually faking an imperial edict? Stormwind had a strict military system. The secrets within were definitely not known to outsiders. He almost wanted to curse the black-robed old man. But the badge of the members of the royal family mage squad was definitely real. Most importantly, he saw the will to live suddenly emerging on the faces of the young men around him. How could he bear to let so many good lads die in a hopeless battle? What's the backup? Tell me. Otherwise, I can't take the risk of 10,000 troops and 20,000 civilians being chased and accept such an order from His Majesty. Duque was anxious too. In the end, he told Seamus one of the backup plans through Mage's messenger. As soon as Seamus heard it, he immediately perked up. Warriors of Stormwind, listen up. The main force has successfully retreated. We are now retreating in an orderly manner. Seamus's loud shout undoubtedly gave the soldiers of the Griffin Legion a shot of adrenaline. Under the suppression of Duque's storm-like magic missiles, the Griffin Legion on this side of the mountain began to retreat in an orderly manner. On another mountain, Anduin, who was in the midst of a bloody battle, immediately realized that something was wrong. Damn it! How could Seamus retreat at this time? At this moment, Lothar even wanted to kill Seamus. The two mountains acted as a barrier for each other. However, once one of the mountains was lost, it would be easy for the other mountain to fall into the enemy's counterattack. Lothar had witnessed the ability of the orcs to climb mountains like they were on flat ground. In the blink of an eye, the beastmen, who had been out of the archer's shooting range, had gone from shooting arrows to shooting straight arrows. In the blink of an eye, they didn't even need to use their spears anymore. They were already using their swords to fight in close combat. However, Anduin immediately discovered that the orcs on the opposite side of the mountain did not chase after them. Instead, they showed signs of dispersing. It was because the orcs' green skin was very eye-catching under the sun. Before Lothar could react, he suddenly discovered that there was something wrong with the orcs in front of him. A large area of ice appeared under the feet of the orcs, and the line of battle between the orcs and the human soldiers was the boundary of the ice. The extreme slipperiness of their feet greatly weakened the orcs' ability to climb mountains. Is there a powerful mage? Chapter 81. Some things were precious only after they were lost. Take Medivh for example. With the guardian of Azeroth and the strongest mage in the world, King Lang could face the most powerful human kingdom, Rotterdam. No matter how many beast men there were, it would only take a few Biyao to finish them off. Teach the orcs how to behave. Now, sigh, it's all tears. At this moment, Lothar had yet to confirm that Medivh was the culprit who caused the entire kingdom to fall into a crisis. However, he was clear about one thing. If even the elite Griffin Legion was defeated like this, the ordinary garrison troops and private soldiers of the nobles would not be a match for them. At this rate, Stormwind would definitely be destroyed by the green-skinned monsters. He had thought about it countless times. If he could return alive this time, he would try to persuade Lang to mobilize the 7 human kingdoms to fight against the Green Tide. But that was just a thought. Until a mysterious black-robed mage floated over from the opposite mountain peak. No one would have noticed him, but the problem was that the mage's appearance was too cool. Not only did he freeze the orc's feet as he floated in the air, but he also had more than 100 mage hand that fired arcane missiles non-stop. Mobile casting was not a very advanced technique. Many official mages knew how to do it. But controlling more than 100 hands of magic to fire at the orcs while he was on the move, and almost all of the bullets hit. That was terrifying. Anduin Lothar was almost dazed. Should he say that this black-robed mage was strong? It felt like he was only using low-level spells. Should he say that he was not strong? The power of this person turning the entire situation around in a short period of time was really terrifying. Perhaps half of the mages of the Wang family would only be able to achieve such an effect. For a moment, Lothar almost thought that his old friend Medivh had turned over a new leaf and returned to the good side. The newcomer was definitely not Medivh. That strange arcane energy definitely did not belong to Medivh. Lothar. Take your people and evacuate immediately. This old man has prepared a few gifts for these rough fellows. It was still the same old voice, and Noxus was stunned to hear it. Duque knew that Noxus wouldn't believe him. Noxus gritted his teeth and nodded. Let's retreat. Someone will cover us. Lothar ordered. He didn't completely believe the mysterious old man's words, but compared to Seamus, his current situation was worse. Seamus was the first to retreat. If he didn't retreat, when the orcs surrounded him, his troops would be annihilated even faster. Just as the remnants of the Griffin Legion retreated up the mountain, Noxus finally received the cover that the mysterious elder had mentioned. They were hundreds of strange arrows. Lothar's sharp eyesight clearly saw that these arrows were longer and more peculiar than the arrows of the Stormwind archers. At first, he thought that these were the arrows that the elven rangers loved, but upon closer inspection, he was shocked to find that these arrows were not fired from bowstrings at all. Similarly, they were not ballistae. Noxus couldn't possibly understand that this was a piece of technology that Duque had brought that could be replicated in this era. As a player who had also played Total War, Rome 2, Duke accidentally found a piece of information. He had forgotten about this piece of information, but the system genie managed to find it. That was the Roman heavy javelin. The spearhead of the heavy javelin had been specially made. First, one of the rivets on the spearhead had been replaced with wood, so that the javelin would break upon impact, making it impossible for the enemy to pull it out and throw it back. Then, the great Emperor Caesar had also made improvements to this kind of javelin. He added a hard iron spearhead to the soft metal shaft, so that the javelin's penetrative power was greater. However, the spearhead was not fully quenched, so it would bend after impact and be difficult to pull out. Later, there were light javelins with lead lumps added to the wooden and iron joint. These javelins had a longer flight range. So what Noxus saw was the final version of the heavy javelin after 3 generations of improvements. On the hilltop, hundreds of young fishermen were throwing javelins after javelin with all their might. After several months of training, they were already very familiar with throwing this strange javelin. However, they had no idea that from the beginning, Duque had not trained them to hunt whales, but to make them javelin throwers. Light bows and arrows could not cause fatal damage to the strong orcs, but javelins were different. The heavy and specially made javelins drew beautiful parabolas in the air. They flew over the heads of the stunned Griffin Legion soldiers and accurately pierced into the burly bodies of the orcs. Under the acceleration of gravity, javelins became sharp weapons that spread death. More than once, orcs that had been pierced in their vital parts were sent flying and rolling down the hillside, even crashing into several orcs. Coordinated with Duque's arcane bullets, the javelin team easily suppressed the entire orc army's offensive. The javelins in the pillbox on the hilltop seemed to pour out endlessly towards the orcs. The entire hillside reverberated with the screams of the orcs, the cheers of the Griffin Legion soldiers, and the whooshing sounds of the javelins breaking through the air. Good. Good. Good kill. Friends on the hilltop, from today onwards, we are brothers. The Griffin Legion soldiers had seen their comrades fall one by one, but were helpless against these barbaric and crude green-skinned creatures. They had long since been suppressing a bellyful of anger. Now that they saw the orcs suffer heavy casualties, they naturally cheered. Only Noxus was clear-headed. He knew that this kind of attack could not last for long. Warriors, bring the weapons of your comrades. The future recruits of the Griffin Legion will need the inheritance of the heroic spirits of these brave warriors. Noxus had already realized that the weapons produced by Stormwind City's craftsmen would not be able to meet the needs of such an all-out war. The road to the hilltop was not easy, but it was nothing for the Griffin Legion soldiers who had not yet exhausted themselves. On the hilltop fortress, Noxus took off his sweaty helmet. He was shocked to find that the people who had protected them with their lives were actually a group of tanned fishermen. They were bare-chested and continued to throw bundles of javelins to the orcs as death gifts. The orcs closest to them were also suppressed 100 meters away. Noxus immediately thought of something and walked in front of Duque. Esteemed Sir Mage. May I ask what is your relationship with Duke Marcus? That kid is my disciple for the time being. Duque continued to speak with the voice-changing system that the system elves had helped to create. He spoke in a tone that seemed to be taking advantage of his seniority and age. Noxus was very smart, and he immediately thought of many things. So the experienced Duque actually had such a mysterious and powerful teacher supporting him. No wonder. Chapter 82. If that was the case, many things could be explained. Noxus didn't know that someone had prepared so many backups without him knowing. He shuddered at the thought of the old man in front of him being an enemy. I know that the situation is urgent, but I still need a reason. Why did you help us? Noxus stared at Duke, who was disguised as an old man. Duque stretched out his hands, revealing 2 old hands that had been specially made up. He gently pulled back his hood, revealing a white beard. Just because I'm a human? Is that a good enough reason? Noxus' body trembled. Right. What a simple reason. In the face of a strange foreign invasion, it was natural for humans to band together to defend against the enemy. Noxus changed his tone. We have many injured soldiers. We will not abandon our comrades. Lads, the second stage. Duque clapped his hands, and a group of peasants rushed out from the back of the mountain. Noxus was no fool. He could tell at a glance that many of the peasants were lumberjacks from the nearby East Cove lumberjacks. They pulled a large number of long ox carts that were originally used to carry logs, eagerly helping the uninjured Griffin Legion soldiers move them onto the ox carts. Noxus was dumbfounded. The other party had prepared so well. Based on the mysterious Magus performance just now, Noxus was sure that he had met a benefactor. Noxus waved to the soldiers. Let's retreat first. Some of the soldiers objected. No, how can we leave civilians behind? Duque laughed. You're wearing heavy armor. How can you run faster than these unarmed javelin throwers? Besides, I'm the one who stays behind. Do you have any objections now? The moment Duque's words left his mouth, the surrounding soldiers were filled with respect. Even the lightly injured soldiers stood up in unison, placing their hands on their chests and raising their swords to the sky. Sword salute. A soldier's most solemn salute to someone worthy of respect. Including Noxus, a total of 300 soldiers saluted to Duque. Duque waved his hand. You can go first. Don't stop me from killing orcs. I'll catch up to you in a bit and let you watch the second act. While Duque was speaking, an uninjured javelin thrower who was hiding in the firing hole of the fortress suddenly howled miserably. Duque narrowed his eyes and squeezed out a few words from between his teeth, pain curse. Lothar's expression was also terrible. Your Excellency, with a wave of his hand, the curse was dispelled by Duque. Go away, this is a battle between mages. The War of the Mages, what a mysterious term. However, this word clearly told Lothar that this wasn't something a warrior like him could meddle in. Nodding heavily, Lothar led his men and Duque's javelin throwers down the mountain. The entire mountaintop fortress became empty once again. In front of the tightly shut gate of the fortress, Duque stood alone against the wind. Standing on a high place, the feeling of the cool spring breeze gently brushing against his face was actually quite nice. Unfortunately, the thick smell of blood was not enough to make one feel comfortable. Duque couldn't help but narrow his eyes as he stared down at the winding mountain below. Almost every step of the mountain was filled with corpses. Some were orcs, but most were humans. Thousands of ferocious orcs stared at Duque. They let out low growls, their pointed fangs reflecting a strange light under the sunlight. If it wasn't for the fact that orcs didn't have the habit of eating humans, Duque might have been worried that he would be torn apart and eaten if he accidentally died. Now, Duque had to buy time for the Griffin Legion to retreat. The orcs wanted to swarm up, but Duque had more than 100 hands of magic floating in the air, which made the orcs who had just been taught a lesson a little afraid to approach. Useless. Is a mere spellcaster enough to scare you? A hunchbacked orc wearing a black robe appeared. Everywhere he went, the orcs immediately parted like the tide. This was a fellow of high status. To receive such treatment among the orcs, if he wasn't the chief of a large clan, then there was only one other possibility, the infamous warlock of the Shadow Council. This was the first time that Duque had seen these warlocks appear on the Azeroth continent from such a close distance. This reminded him of the tragic experience of being abused by warlocks as a mage in the game. The warlock brought the hellhounds to teach mages how to be human. But you didn't even bring a pet? Are you looking down on me? No, maybe you brought a succubus? Even though he had been a transmigrator for a long time, when Duque suddenly encountered a warlock, he couldn't help but think like a player. It was a pity that this person didn't look like Ghoul Dan. If that was the case, there was still a fight. The World Guardian Medivh and the Beastman Warlock Ghoul Dan were both demigod-level existences in most games. Duque didn't have the confidence to face one of them when he was so weak. Warlocks were experts who used demonic power to play with souls. Duque really didn't dare to be sure that if he died at the hands of a warlock, he wouldn't become a ghoul when he revived, the warlock shouted in a gibberish. Duque couldn't understand the orc language, and the system elf didn't know how to translate it. Just seeing the system elf's random translation of, "The Imperial Army wants you to surrender and not kill," made Duque want to strangle the system elf to death. It was useless to say anything, and Duque wasn't interested in a human running over to the orcs. So, there was only one thing he could do. Duque raised his middle finger. Yes, this was the starting gesture for Duque to release Blizzard. If this was a game, a mage would be an idiot to release Blizzard on a warlock. But reality was obviously different. Within the range of Blizzard, the icicles fell rapidly, very well interfering with the warlock's vision. The warlock retaliated with a shadow arrow, but with the system elf's ballistic judgment assistance, Duque only moved sideways a step to the right, allowing the shadow arrow to hit the huge fortress gate. Without hesitation, 108 hands of magic suddenly grabbed weapons from all over the fortress. Sorry, I'm not some ordinary mage. If you don't have any other tricks up your sleeve, then die. 108 javelins were thrown brazenly, from the sky to the ground, almost blocking all the orc warlocks' escape routes. Almost at the same time, Duque was hit. Countless frightening illusions suddenly appeared in his mind. They were fragments of fear hidden in his heart, fragments that he had completely forgotten. Duque suddenly saw, in the dead of night, a huge venomous snake flew up, opened its mouth full of fangs, and bit his face. That fear, that pain was so real that Duque almost instantly let out a scream. Chapter 83. Fear poured into his thoughts like a tide, or it could be said that a malicious robber had kicked open the door to Duque's heart and barged in wantonly. Duque's breathing quickened, and his pupils dilated. However, he turned a deaf ear to the urgent warning of the system elf. Many desperate and heart-palpitating scenes emerged in Duque's mind, such as those terrible pale skeleton soldiers in horror movies waving rusty machetes and slashing at him. Another example was walking by a small river and suddenly being pulled into the river by a huge black octopus tentacle. He struggled desperately in the cold water, but to no avail. Duque struggled to get rid of these terrible illusions, but this illusion of fear that came from the depths of his memory had completely dominated Duque's 5 senses. Whether it was vision, hearing, smell, taste, or touch, they were all real feelings. This feeling of terror easily disrupted Duque's thoughts. He felt his energy drying up, and there was a piercing pain in his brain. He didn't know when, but from his forehead to his neck, and then to his back, his whole body was drenched, as if he had been fished out of the water. Seeing Duque's clumsy dance, the orcs who had just been defeated burst into laughter. The orcs, who advocated force, worshipped heroic warriors the most. They instinctively hated spellcasters, but they had enough respect for the shaman priests in the tribe, and even these new warlocks. They had thought that this would be another gorgeous killing feast for the warlocks. They had thought that the mage controlled by fear would laughably run under the orc's axe and take a blow with his thin body. However, the situation suddenly changed. Those hands of magic that should have disappeared were still attacking fiercely, throwing a large number of javelins. Unfortunately, the seemingly invincible javelin tactic failed. This orc warlock actually took out an axe and blocked all the threatening javelins with clanging sounds. If Duque was still sober, he would have realized that before becoming a warlock of the Shadow Council, almost all orc warlocks used to be shamans who could fight and cast spells. Compared to the simple orc warriors, the shaman was more versatile in the tribe. Duque's strange reaction also made Barca the warlock feel puzzled. He really couldn't understand how Duque, who had already fallen into chaos under his fear spell, could control those hands of magic. Obviously, these hands of magic were still operating independently. Countless purple-blue rays of light suddenly shot out from the hand of magic, and the violent arcane missiles hit the orc warlock who was in the middle of casting a spell. But what even the system elf didn't predict was that the spell shot by the hand of magic actually bounced off the beastman warlock's black robe and disappeared. Magic was a part of mysticism, but it was also a part of energetics. Just like how high-level mystery could suppress low-level mystery, low-level arcane missiles with lower energy density were rejected by the evil dark energy around the warlock. Host. Wake up. I can't take it anymore. The system elf croaked in Duque's spiritual world. Weak human, I don't know how you managed to fight back under the fear spell, but it's all over. Die. The orc warlock roared in the orc language and cast a sacrifice spell at the orc warlock. Along with the raging flames of destruction, the evil demonic power spread in all directions. That power not only infected the beastmen who had already absorbed the demonic blood, but it also made them even more berserk and bloodthirsty. At the same time, it also affected Duque. Suddenly, Duque felt that he was being looked down upon. He was being looked down upon by someone who he only saw as an EXP monster. His mental state was so strange that he didn't even notice the system notification. Stimulated by unknown demonic energy, you have triggered the negative soul status, pride, of the 7 sins. Your words and actions will be out of control. You and the enemies affected by your pride will not use any defensive means. Among all the means of attack, you will automatically choose the most powerful one. If either side kills the other, it will cause a double blow to the enemy's morale. You are immune to the reduction of morale. You will automatically be affected by the effect of reckless curse. You will not run away and are immune to fear. Duke's body suddenly trembled. The orc warlock was shocked to find that the flames of destruction that were burning Duke's body were all gathered in Duke's hands. Duke suddenly lifted his hood. What appeared in the orc's eyes was a white-haired, white-bearded old man with an arrogant expression. The corners of his mouth were raised high. Duke spoke in a strange language that was neither the common human language nor the orc language. Both sides could understand it. This should be some kind of spiritual communication that went beyond body language. Listen up. Green-skinned bastards, my name is Wuxia. Hundred-handed death god Wuxia. The world of Azeroth is my playground, there is no place for ugly monsters like you to join in. Let me tell you, I even killed Ghoul Dan's boss Jaden countless times. Ghoul Dan is nothing. If you know what's good for you, then scram back to where you came from. Otherwise, I, Wuxia, will show you what regret and despair are. The beast men were dumbfounded by his words. They didn't know who Jaden was, but almost every orc knew how powerful Ghoul Dan was. This skinny human actually said Ghoul Dan is nothing? After a short moment of shock, the orcs all roared in anger. But Duke's arrogance did not decrease. He raised his chin high and looked at the millions of orcs like they were trash. Ghoul Dan's power came from the devil. More accurately, it came from Jaden. This was a top secret. Not many warlocks in Ghoul Dan's Shadow Council knew about it. But this warlock in front of him was one of them. He stretched out his strong arm and grabbed a chief next to him. Leave this arrogant guy to me. Tell your people not to make a move. Right now, the chief of the tribe was the mastermind. But any chief with a brain knew that the real power was in the hands of Ghoul Dan and his Shadow Council. The chieftain nodded and barked a few words at his men. Instantly, the entire place was silent. Weak humans. Let me, Balsa, show you how terrifying the power of destruction is. Duke raised a hand and beckoned with his index finger. Come. Chapter 84. Provocation. Absolute provocation. Ghoul Dan's status in the tribe was second only to one and above tens of thousands of people. The Shadow Council was an organization that controlled the power of the tribe. Every warlock had a sense of superiority. Plus, pride had an effect on Balsa and Duke. It was hilarious. Both parties, who had countless tricks up their sleeves, were actually using magic against each other. Using magic against each other was not uncommon in the battles of the Pharaoh. Completely abandoning defense for an attack was something that had never been seen before. It should have been a hilarious scene, but because both parties poured all of their magic into this attack, it suddenly became extremely thrilling. The tip of Balsa's magic staff was also a skull. If one looked closely, they would realize that it was made from the skull of a high-ranking Drenii priest. The evil Balsa forced this Drenii priest, who once believed in the holy light, to witness the murder of thousands of Drenii children. He was tortured inhumanely and then soaked in a pool of blood to drown him. Finally, his resentful soul was imprisoned in his skull. The wavy evil resentment that this skull staff emitted could be seen with the naked eye. The dark light on the magic staff became brighter and brighter. 3 faint black halos with mysterious runes appeared on the body of the staff. From the top to the bottom, the front, the middle, and the back of the staff formed a cone shape. The largest halo instantly expanded to a radius of about a meter. The 2 halos at the front and the back were rotating clockwise, while the one in the middle was rotating counterclockwise. It was like a strange drill. Gulp, accompanied by an unknown incantation, an ink-black pillar of light suddenly appeared. It pierced through the curtain of air in front of him, swept away the golden light of the sun, and pierced straight towards Duque, who was in front of the gate of the fortress. The light was so dark that it seemed like it could destroy the entire day and forcefully pull the world into the realm of night. This light also shocked every pair of eyes on the battlefield, and countless orcs subconsciously lowered their gazes. They did not dare to look at it. However, in the next moment, the orcs raised their heads again. They felt a gust of blazing wind blowing towards them, and a scorching hot breath brushed past their cheeks. They could not believe their eyes. At this moment, time seemed to freeze. Sun, there were actually two suns in the world? No, it wasn't a sun in front of him. It was a huge fireball that looked like a sun. With a radius of more than 50 meters, it was enough to burn an entire mountain, let alone a single beastman. In the depths of the orc warlock's red eyes, his pupils shrank to a point. He slightly opened his jaws full of fangs and breathed heavily. The orcs next to him thought he was nervous. Only he, who had personally experienced the battle between the orcs and the Draenei, knew that he had been fooled. This mysterious powerful wizard in front of him was just a fake. What high-ranking pharaoh? What human powerhouse? Bullshit. Who was it trying to fool with such a motley and low concentration of magic power? It would be difficult for a true mage to produce so many impurities in their own magic power. Regardless of whether he was an old man or not, his magic level was definitely not high. Barca was enraged. He was truly enraged. He stabbed with his magic staff and shot out all the magic power he had infused into the staff. Go to hell. Originally, Barca wanted to shout out the word liar, but he was stunned again. He didn't even realize that the magic staff that he was holding tightly had loosened its grip on his rough and powerful knuckles. The speed at which his opponent gathered magic power was too fast. It was not something that a low-ranking wizard could do. Both of them had infused all their magic power, but Barca's casting time was a full 3 seconds. How could his opponent cast it instantaneously? Barca also knew that high-ranking warlocks could greatly reduce the casting time by training their own casting techniques. However, wasn't his opponent's technique too terrifying? The huge fireball came crashing down. The airflow and dust stirred up by the fireball caused all the orcs' whips and hair to fly in the opposite direction. The orcs seemed to be scared out of their wits. This group of rough men who only knew how to fight hand-to-hand were instinctively afraid of this seemingly powerful super fireball. Only Balsa's eyes were filled with disdain. He wanted to say, "Watch my shadow arrow, blow up that guy's fireball and turn him into ashes in the shadow." However, the situation changed once again. The huge fireball arrived before the shadow arrow could travel more than 10 meters. There wasn't the earth-shattering collision that Barca had expected. Instead, the huge fireball split into 108. It changed from a brute force, flame blast, to a skillful, rapid fireball. This was no different from letting Barca punch the air. These fireballs seemed to have been dispersed by the shadow arrow, but in reality, they drew bright and blazing arcs in the air. Before the shadow arrow could reach its target, the fireballs had already landed on Barca's body. Bang, 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 bang. The continuous explosions turned into a long explosive sound. Indeed, the fireball that was infused with such a low concentration of magic power couldn't hurt Barca directly. However, the fireball didn't only deal elemental damage. The impact from the explosion was unavoidable. As an old warlock who wasn't particularly powerful, Barca could totally summon a void devil and sacrifice it. Then, he would disintegrate it and turn it into a shield to protect himself. If that was the case, even if Duque used another 10,086 fireballs, it wouldn't be of any use, let alone 108 fireballs. However, Barca was more arrogant than Duque, so he wasn't willing to use such a method to obtain victory. It's just a low-level spell, so I'll just have to take it head-on. That was what Barca thought. Of course, he didn't know that it was Duque's soul energy, one of the 7 major sins, pride, that was affecting him at the same time. In the end, under the gaze of thousands of orcs, Barca was beaten up badly. Laugh. Laugh. Wait for my shadow arrow to hit him. Both Barca and Duque didn't expect that there would be a third party involved in this seemingly one-on-one duel. The name of the third party was the System Elf. What should I do? What should I do? After the simulation. There are 98 seconds left before the host's Flame Blast will lose its effect and he will be killed by the opponent's Dark Attribute Arrow attack. According to my calculations, if the host is killed by a warlock who uses demonic energy, there's a high chance that the host will completely lose his humanity and become a ghoul after resurrection. If the host completely loses his rationality, the System Elf will also be finished. Originally, it's my principle not to interfere with the host's decisions. However, the host has lost his rationality. Yes. I can activate the emergency plan to protect the host. No one noticed that a mage's hand had appeared between the orc warlock's loose mage robe and cloak. This hand didn't use any kind of spell to attack. According to the calculations of the System Elf, with Duque's current level, any spell attack would be ineffective against the orc warlock. Therefore, the System Elf very treacherously picked up the broken sword of a human warrior on the ground and quickly stabbed it from behind. Chapter 85. Intense explosions were happening all around them. The strong shockwave escaped the senses of the orc warlock. He did not expect that the arrogant human in front of him would stab him in the back. Of course, he did not expect that it was a System Elf who did it on his own. Therefore, when he felt a sharp sword avoid his left shoulder and stab into his heart, his face was full of disbelief. You. He wanted to scold, but the System Elf was afraid that he would not die. It twisted the sword around his heart a few times, almost cutting him into minced meat. Everything was covered up by the explosion, and no one knew about it. The orcs who had retreated a long time ago looked at the warlock on their side with anticipation. However, they soon realized that something was wrong. The menacing shadow arrow lost its aim halfway through its flight. It tilted to one side and shot into the mountain, dyeing a large area of the mountain black. However, the mysterious human's fireballs bombarded Balsa's body one after another. After about 1/3 of the fireballs were used up, Balsa's defense began to fade. After 2/3 of the fireballs, the magic on the surface of Balsa's body had completely dissipated. However, the high-purity magic that flowed in his body was still resisting the low-purity magic from the flame blast. To the orc warriors, it was a completely different matter. This human was so cruel. He could have killed Balsa with a powerful fireball, but he had to create more than 100 fireballs and throw them at him one by one. This was clearly torture. After the last fireball was thrown at Balsa, the orc warlock, who was full of unwillingness and was burnt black, finally breathed his last. In order to cover up what it had done, the System Elf obediently snatched Balsa's magic staff with the magician's hand, before the flames completely engulfed Balsa. Duque, who had regained his senses, realized that his System Elf had given him the magic staff as a trophy as if it was a treasure. Duque was stunned at first, then he laughed hysterically. The arrogant laughter stimulated the orcs' nerves again. They did not understand the battle of magic spells. However, they knew that the other party had played the trick of killing the general and capturing the flag. It was also this black-robed human who had destroyed their dream of killing the big shots on the human side. Unknowingly, these brave orc warriors were afraid. Ha ha ha. Who else? Who else? Duque seemed to be affected by the aftermath of pride, as he waved the orc warlock's skeletal staff in an extremely arrogant manner. Looking at the tens of thousands of orcs hesitating to advance, Duque laughed maniacally. He raised his black cloak with one hand and turned around to enter the fortress. A minute passed. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes passed. Not a single chief or orc dared to take a step forward to check if Duque had left. Suddenly, a huge and ferocious figure rushed out from the back of the orc army. Like a bird startled by a ferocious beast, the orcs scattered in all directions. "What are you doing?" "My order is for you to attack." "Attack. Attack again. Annihilate all human warriors in sight." "What are you guys daydreaming about? Had they killed all the humans? Where is the human chieftain's head?" It was the tribe's chief in name, Black Hand, the Destroyer. "No, that." Black Hand finally understood what had happened from the little tribal chief's intermittent narration. "What? You bunch of trash that tarnished the tribe's honor." Without giving the little tribal chief a chance to explain himself, the huge warhammer drew a terrifying arc in the air and smashed into the little tribal chief's head with an indescribable force. The upper half of the orc chief's body was smashed into minced meat. Waving the bloodied warhammer, Black Hand pointed angrily at the top of the mountain. "The great tribe does not need cowardly orcs, go after them." Driven by the chief's anger, the once stagnant green torrent began to surge once again. The orcs almost destroyed all the human buildings they could see. After passing through the fortress at the top of the mountain, they arrived at the back of the mountain. The orcs saw the human army's tail. They were moving at a slow speed into the forest at the foot of the mountain. Starting from the forest, that was the boundary of the elven forest. Chase. Behind them was the chief. Firstly, the orcs had lost their path of retreat. Secondly, they were ashamed of their cowardice just now. They roared angrily and waved their battle axes and war hammers as they poured down from the mountain. The orcs' strange movements naturally alarmed Lothar, who was at the back. He and General Seamus, who had just regrouped, looked at each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. Seamus said, "What a terrifying lord. Not only is he extremely powerful, but he also knows the movement patterns of those green-skinned monsters so well." Lothar was about to say something when he suddenly saw a cavalry rushing towards him. Lothar could tell that it was a noble's cavalry, and the leader was Duke Bolvar Fordragon. "Oh, Thoradin the Great above, Lothar. You survived." Bolvar did not hide his ecstasy. He reined in the horse that was panting heavily and jumped down to give Lothar a big hug. The sound of two real men's armor clashing was so pleasant to the ear. "I thought I was going to die too." Lothar was also very moved to see Bolvar risking his life to help. As the highest commander of the retreating army and a duke of high status, Bolvar could have just left or sent his subordinates to receive him. But Bolvar had come, and he'd gathered all the private cavalry of the nobles. Looking around at the rather pitiful Griffin Legion soldiers, Bolvar's eyes grew moist. "You've done very well." Bolvar turned his gaze to the torrent pouring down from the mountain. "You guys retreat first. I'll help you launch a counterattack before they descend the mountain and enter the forest." It was not a good idea to charge towards the high ground on horseback. Under normal circumstances, this would be the only way to protect the Griffin Legion. Seamus spoke at this moment. He pointed at the black dot floating down the mountain before the green flood. "It seems that there's no need for that. That lord is here." Bolvar noticed that Lothar had a clear expression of relief on his face. "Which lord?" Lothar sighed. He called himself the hundred-handed reaper Wuxia in the mage's message. "He's the teacher of that Duke Marcus." Seamus added, "A very powerful high-ranked mage." Chapter 86. Lothar patted young Bolvar's shoulder. "Let's go. We'll talk about the details later." Since Lord Wuxia was able to delay the orcs for so long, he must have a backup plan. Backup plan? Bolvar's curiosity was about to explode. "Let's go first," Lothar said without hesitation. The Griffin Legion and Bolvar's 300 cavalry rushed through the forest before the orc army could charge down the mountain. They followed the pontoon and wooden bridges that had been set up beforehand and crossed a river with a rather low water level. Feeling the moist spring air and looking at the low water level, Lothar fell into deep thought. The orcs were here. When Lothar and the last soldier of the Griffin Legion crossed the pontoon bridge and stepped onto the opposite shore, the already deafening roars of the orcs suddenly rose to a new level. The ear-piercing screams of the orcs pierced the eardrums of Lothar, Bolvar, and the others. A green wave even more terrifying than the one at the Riedridge Mountains squeezed out from the small forest they had just passed. From every gap in the trees, there were roaring orcs charging out with weapons. There were simply too many of them. Lothar had no choice but to turn his head to look at the rapidly expanding front line of the orcs. It was still that majestic aura that could swallow mountains and rivers. Young Bolvar didn't feel much, but Lothar and Seamus narrowed their eyes and looked seriously at the messy flags that looked like scribbles. Their expressions changed once more. Damn it, the greenskins have increased their numbers. Even though Lothar couldn't really tell, he instinctively felt that there were at least 30% more flags that he hadn't seen before. Exchanging glances with Seamus, they knew what they had to do. Whether it was according to the agreement or military common sense, they couldn't retreat any longer. The Griffin Legion once again carried out their mission to cut off the retreat. 1,500 soldiers formed 3 rows of 500 people along the shore just after they left the river. The soldiers who weren't too heavily injured struggled to climb down from the vehicle. They practically used their bodies to support themselves as they stood behind their comrades, forming the frail 4th row. At this moment, Lothar suddenly realized that Duque had already floated through the forest and was gently floating in front of him. Lothar knew that this was the mage's slow fall spell, but to be able to use it so accurately, this mysterious mage's strength was unfathomable. "Hello, Your Excellency Wuxia." Lothar took the initiative to greet him. "Hello, Sir Lothar. It seems that we have established a preliminary level of trust." Among the backup plans that Duque had agreed on, Lothar was also to form a formation on the riverbank slightly away from the river. Duque asked in an old voice, "You don't seem to be worried that I'll harm you now?" "It's nothing. At most, I'll just lose my life again for the same reason." Noxus revealed a hearty smile. "Also, I don't believe that you would harm me, because we are both humans." "Yes, because we are all humans." Strangely, these two people, who were at least 20 years apart in age, easily found common ground. How was the battle with the spellcaster just now? Lothar was all smiles when he saw Duque appear. The result was certain. The only question was how much he would win. Duque did not say anything. He threw out the orc warlock's skull staff that emitted evil energy. The vengeful spirit on the staff seemed to have absorbed the blood of the ferocious beasts and became less violent, but it was still menacing. "Take it back to the high-ranking priest in Stormwind City. I think there will be people on your side who will be interested." Hiss. Lothar, Seamus, and Fordragon all secretly gasped at the same time. Battles between mages were indeed extremely mysterious. But everyone knew that it was one thing to defeat the opponent. Killing the other party was another matter. Killing the opponent was more than twice as difficult as defeating the opponent. Now, this mysterious Wuxia actually performed the mage's version of killing the general and capturing the flag under the watchful eyes of tens of thousands of orcs. What kind of power was this? They thought of how Duque had suppressed 2 waves of orcs' frenzied attacks by himself and saved the entire Griffin Legion. Then, they thought of how he killed the enemy's powerful spellcaster in front of the formation this time. The 3 couldn't help but raise their evaluation of Duque countless times. However, Duque's performance wasn't over yet. Seeing that the fastest orcs had already rushed to the shore and were about to enter the water, Lothar and the others suddenly felt their hearts in their mouths. The water of this long river wasn't deep. For humans, the water didn't reach their waists, but for the tall and burly orcs, it was only as deep as their thighs. It wasn't a problem at all. If the orcs were allowed to charge, it wouldn't take more than a few minutes for the vanguard of the orc army to cross the river and engage the Griffin Legion. Feeling the gazes of the 3 military bigwigs, Duque smiled lightly and then raised his right hand towards the orcs. In the void, 24 hands of magic appeared. They had the same posture as Duque's right hand. 6 seconds of chanting seemed like a long time, but in the face of an army, it was equivalent to a short instant. Under the gaze of Lothar and the others, 12 fireballs were sent flying. They flew crookedly into the sky and blossomed into fireworks-like balls of fire. The other 12 shot into the forest on the other side, instantly igniting the forest. These 12 fireballs were a perfect demonstration of what was called dry wood and raging fire, and the fire actually spread all at once. The orcs who drank the demon's blood were very violent and very brave, but that didn't mean that they were completely irrational berserkers. There were still too many things that they would instinctively fear, such as flames. Countless orcs turned into running humanoid torches in the blink of an eye. They either rolled on the ground in pain, or, under the leadership of the smarter ones, frantically rushed into the river to put out the fire on their bodies. Lothar stared dumbfounded at the scene in front of him, his mouth quivering, and finally asked his question. "It's still spring, and when we passed through the forest just now, it was still very wet." Duque rolled his eyes at Lothar. "I can temporarily turn several miles of land into a tundra, why can't I dry up that small forest a little?" Seamus, Bolvar, Lothar, they were all stupefied. What a terrifying amount of magic power. Was this guy really human? That's right, Duque was using Darson's scorching furnace. His magic power wasn't enough to heat the entire forest to the point of spontaneous combustion, but he could still dry it a little. This was the greatest benefit of inheriting the Sun King's arcane fire circuit. Even though he wasn't a true sky wizard, 3 months of seclusion had allowed Duque to possess a terrifying amount of magic power that far exceeded most sky wizards. Even compared to many Morning Star wizards, Duque's magic power was not inferior in the slightest. Duque's fire stratagem was indeed impressive. At a glance, at least 2,000 or 3,000 orcs were buried in the sea of fire. However, compared to Duque's flawless performance, the corners of Lothar's eyes twitched as he watched the thousands of orcs rush into the river to escape. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.